Alrighty, let's go, boys. Now, is the sound all good? I just want to check with chat. It's a little hot day here, and I've got my window and fan on. I hope it doesn't ruin the audio or anything. We got all the usuals in the chat. Howdy Tyler, howdy Marshall. Ghoul is in there as well. Howdy Ghoul. So we got a big chapter today, boys. We got a big one. Not gonna lie. Once again, I'm capping this at like 4 hours. We make it to there and I die, so be it. But if we don't make it all the way, we gotta probably have to cut this in two. Alrighty, I think because it's so big, that's what she said. Because it's so big, we should just jump right into it. So last week we were talking about hypnosis, and now we're gonna talk about Russia. Predictions. I think he's gonna dunk on maybe Russian literature. He's gonna talk about Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, maybe some Pushkin. I guess he's gonna talk about Bolsheviks. I think, we've all heard he has some interesting views on Russians. We've all read In Search of the Miraculous. So let's see if some of that comes up here. Alrighty, chapter 34. Rusa. Alrighty. All further events during this last sojourn of mine on the surface of the planet Earth, connected with the abnormal form of the usual being existence of those three-brained beings who please you, and at the same time many trifling incidents of all kinds which elucidated the characteristic details of their peculiar psyche, began from the following. Once walking, one morning, by the said pyramids. So he's in Egypt. It's titled Russia, but remember last chapter he goes to Egypt for some vacation time, because he just can't take being a doctor all the time. A certain elderly being, a stranger, and in exterior appearance not native, approached me, and greeting me in the manner customary there, addressed me with the following words. Doctor, you will perhaps do me the kindness to allow me to be your companion on your morning walks. I have noticed that you always walk in this neighborhood alone. I am also very fond of walking here of a morning, and as I too am quite alone here in Egypt, I venture to propose to you that I should accompany you on these walks of yours. So he's in Egypt and some foreign guy is coming and rizzing him up, wanting to hold hands on his morning walks. Let's see what happens. Since the vibrations of his radiations in relation to mine appeared not acutely Otkaluparnian, get those shot glasses ready, boys, or as your favorites in such case would say, since he appeared to be sympathetic. Okay, so Otkaluparnian means sympathetic. Thank you, Gurdjieff. And furthermore, because I myself had already thought of establishing here also corresponding mutual relations with someone in order as a rest from active mentation to converse sometimes by following only the course of freely flowing associations. So it can be relaxing to hang out with bros and just chit-chat. It's like a podcast, but in real life. I at once agreed to his proposition, and from that day forth began to spend the time of my morning strolls with him. So he's got a morning bro. During our further acquaintanceship, it transpired that this foreigner was a subject of that large community called Rusa, and that among his compatriots he was an important power-possessing being. Spicy. I guess that means he's either a politician or he's got a lot of money. During these walks of ours together, it so happened that we began, why I don't know, to talk chiefly about the weak will of the three-brained beings and about those weaknesses unworthy of them, which they themselves call vices, and to which they particularly, the contemporary beings, accustom themselves very quickly, and which finally become for them a basis in the sense of the aim of their existence, as well as in the sense of the quality of their being manifestations. Okay, so he's going to go psychological on us again. So through, once again, story in a story, he's telling the story to Hassan, his grandson. And in this story, he's talking to a guy who he's going on morning walks with, and they're talking about weaknesses. So this is going to be some psychological content here. Let's see what advice Gurdjieff gives us through this narrative. Once during one of these conversations of ours, he addresses me suddenly, said, "My dear doctor, in my native land, during recent times, the passion for alcohol is strongly developed and widely spread amongst people of all classes. Which passion, as you know, always sooner or later leads in general to those forms of mutual relationship which usually bring about the destruction of the century-old pillars and attainments of society." So, my kinsmen are all drunk. All Russians are drunk. This is just why several far-sighted compatriots of mine, having at last understood all the seriousness of such a situation as had arisen in our country, collected together in order perhaps to devise conjointly some means or other for the prevention of any catastrophic consequence. For the realization of this task of theirs, they there and then decided to found a society under the name of the Trusteeship of People's Temperance, and they chose me to be the head of this enterprise. That's interesting. So remember in previous chapters, he's talking about, he has this idea of legomenisms, which is like talking about how do we protect the teachings or esoteric kind of knowledge, occult knowledge, and not just protect it, but perpetuate it through time without it being lost or destroyed in wars. Lost, corrupted, or destroyed in wars. And so he's talking to a guy, and this guy has understood the same problem. But he's gone from the path with the beings that he's around. He's gone through this path of creating just another institution, basically. And so he is the head of an institution, the trusteeship of People's Temperance. And it doesn't seem to be that he's preserving necessarily esoteric stuff. He's just preserving necessary, what would you say, necessary cultural artifacts, so to speak. Tyler in the chat says, is this his meeting with Ouspensky? Ooh, maybe. That's interesting. I wonder if Ouspensky is in this book, if this is a kind of him meeting Ouspensky, but I don't know. We'll see. There's not much, we haven't had much data on this guy yet. Let's see where he goes with it. Because it could be that this guy is representative of Ouspensky, but it seems at the moment he's just using this guy as a device to start like dunking on Russians, but we'll see where he goes with it. At the present time, the activities of the trusteeship as regards to the organization of measures for the struggle against the said state evil are in full swing. Okay, so they also seem to be against alcoholism. We have already done much, and we have in view to do much more. Having said this, he became a little thoughtful and continued thus. If now, my dear doctor, you were to ask my personal opinion as to the results expected from this trusteeship, ours sincerely speaking, I should, although I am at the head of it, find it very difficult to say anything good about it. So the guy's realizing that the institution doesn't do much good. It's like, when you join a charity organization and then you're just like, oh, these guys suck. As regards the general position of affairs of this trusteeship of ours, I, meanwhile, personally, place my hope only in a chance. In my opinion, the whole evil consists in this, that this trusteeship is under the protection of several groups, upon whom any realization of its task just depends. But as these groups each follow their own particular aims and wishes concerning each separate question, then, over the solution of each separate question concerning the basic aim of the trusteeship, controversy always reigns. That's quite a paragraph there. And thanks to this, day by day, instead of improving the conditions for a speedy possibility of a realization, indeed of the aim which has been set as a basis of this very important actualization for my dear fatherland, there only increases, interesting he says fatherland instead of motherland, there only increases among the separate members of our trusteeship all kinds of misunderstandings, personal considerations, gossip, intrigue, plots, and so on and so forth. Okay, so he's just talking about bureaucratic nonsense that goes on when you're just trying to help people out. As regards myself personally, I have... So this doesn't seem like Ouspensky. This seems like, you know, in Search of the Miraculous, when he talks about his... Ouspensky talks about his time in the Russia group. And there's that one guy who's like a politician that always rages about stuff and always has opinions. It sounds more like that guy, if anything. As regards myself, personally, I have, during recent times, so much thought, rethought, and consulted with various people who have more or less life experience in order to find some way or other out of the situation, which has turned out so sorrowfully that I reached such a state that I nearly fell ill and was compelled by the insistence of those near to me to undertake this journey here to Egypt with the sole object of resting. So he also went to Egypt to rest and relax. But alas, now here in Egypt, even I have met with no success, because always those same black thoughts of mine give me no peace. Tyler says, sound like syndicalism is bogging them down. Yeah. They need... Yeah. Now, my dear doctor, you already know approximately the gist of that affair, which was the cause for my present spiritual unbalance. I will frankly confess to you my inner thoughts and hopes, which have arisen in connection with my acquaintanceship with you. The point is, he continued, that during our frequent lengthy talks on the subject of the evil Da Vinci. Hello, Da Vinci, which is Da Vinci's in the chat. It says you're a member. I got a highlight there. Howdy, Da Vinci, welcome. And you're a Gnostic Hierophant. Da Vinci of eating kittens. I didn't know you're a member of the Discord, Da Vinci. Just kidding. There is no Discord. Now, the point is, he continued. This also sounds interesting. This is like this Russian guy clearly is sus. I don't know. He came to Beelzebub. He knew he was a doctor and he wanted to ask him something, but he like didn't ask directly. He was like, "Hey man, want to go on morning talks?" And then just slowly over time, just like slipped, increased the relationship, and then just slipped some like stuff. And he's trying to mine this guy Beelzebub for some help. People like that, where it's like they see someone of value or see someone of knowledge, but they don't just ask straight out. They kind of just slide in slowly and work him. Welcome, talented tongue master. So the point is, he continued, that during our frequent lengthy talks on the subject of the evil vices of people and about the possible measures for getting rid of them. So maybe this is also like Gurdjieff being like, this is how you should approach people of knowledge. You don't just ask them outright. You got to befriend them first. You got to, Gurdjieff is actually showing us the correct technique of extracting knowledge of people with higher being level than us. I reached a full conviction of your thorough competency in questions of the subtle understanding of people's psyche, as well as in the creating of conditions for the struggle against their weaknesses. And that is why I regard you as the only man who might be the source of every kind of initiative for the organization, as well as for the carrying out in life of the activities of the trusteeship founded there at home for the struggle against alcoholism. So it's like, he's asking, this basically is like Alcoholics Anonymous, the chapter. The chapter titled Russia is his chapter on alcoholism. Very funny. Very funny, Gurdjieff. Yesterday morning, an idea came into my head, over which I thought the whole day and evening. And it is about this that I finally decided to ask you. Would you consent to go to my country, to Russia? And after you have seen everything on the spot that is going on there, help us to organize this trusteeship of ours in such a way that it may indeed become that use to my country for which it was founded. He further added, your just humaneness gives me courage to address this request to you, as well as the assurance that you will not, of course, refuse to take part in the work of saving perhaps millions of people. So this guy just straight up sweet-talked Beelzebub into getting him to go to Russia and help his institution out, which was going downhill. When the sympathetic elderly Russian finished speaking, I, having thought a little, replied that I might very possibly consent to his proposal to go to Russia, since that country might perhaps be very suitable also for my chief aim. Straight on, straight on. This guy, straight up sweet-tongued him. He's talking about sweet tongues. Sweet-tongued Beelzebub into going to Russia. Further, I said to him, at the present time, it's almost like he's teaching us, like, this is how you manipulate, like, people of a higher being level to, like, come to your country and help your people out, or, like, if you have a group, sweet-talk people to come to your group and help them out. Like, sweet-talk a master to come to your group. We've got love hearts in the chat. Is that my adorable wife dropping in to say hi to me again? Sometimes she comes in and watches. I always know it's her just pumping the hearts out in chat. Further, I said to him, at the present time, I have but one aim, namely specifically to clear up for myself all the details of the manifestations of the human psyche of individuals existing separately as well as in groups. Well now, for the elucidation of the state and manifestations of the psyche of large groups, Russia would perhaps be very suitable for me, since I have understood during our talks the disease of the passion for alcohol is spread there in your country among almost the entire population. Girls in the chat confirmed. Hello, wife, says Tyler. Thanks to which I shall the more often have the possibility of carrying out my experiments in various types, each separately as well as in a mass. This is really interesting. Has anyone read the book Dayspring of Youth? In that book, he talks about consciousness in the body and how the body is kind of an aggregate of different, like, consciousnesses. He just says, he tries to make it sciencey, and he's like, atoms of consciousness, and there are atoms that are aspiring, and then there's indolent atoms that fight against you. But he says these atoms are kind of organized by, like, these central atoms of command. Like, within your heart is the nous atom that speaks and organizes the aspiring atoms, and then, like, at the base of the spine is the atom of the secret enemy, which, like, speaks to the indolent atoms and gets them to fight against the aspiring atoms. And it's kind of like, oh, that's really interesting. It's like a kind of a proto-pan-psychic framework where the little individual bits kind of create a whole being. But there's, like, this one thing, the nous atom is trying to pull us upwards to continue to get us to develop, whereas the atom of the secret enemy is trying to pull us down. The reason I mention that is, in the Dayspring of Youth, I'm pretty sure it's in the Dayspring of Youth, the author says, the atom of the secret enemy, one of its main aims for sabotaging our spiritual path is to make us alcoholics. That's like the first thing it does. He says that's the first plan of the atom of the secret enemy. And if it can't make us an alcoholic, it'll then go and do other stuff. You know, try to tempt us with money or women or things like that. But it's like the first thing it does is try to make us an alcoholic. And I'm like, I know, money and women seems more like the first one, but I found that interesting, that perspective. It just kind of reminded me. It reminded me of that. Ooh, thank you, honey. My wife just got me green juice. Oh, God. It's got ice in it. Save this to sip. It's a long chapter. So my wife's, like, in the other room, just checking in on me on her phone every now and then. But I'm just mentioning that about the Dayspring of Youth and that whole thing on alcoholism, because it's like, in this we're talking about Russia, alcoholism, and Beelzebub's like, yes. My main aim is to go to Russia to study the peculiarity of the psyche of these people, i.e. the Kunda buffer organ. Where was the Kunda buffer organ attached to? The instinctual cylinder, which is where? At the base of the spine, which is where the atom of the secret enemy is. So it's like, very interesting. Very interesting. There's this continuous, there's a theme that connects like a thread from one system to another. Because that Dayspring of Youth, I made a video on it a while ago on who I think it is, but the source of that guy's teachings basically seems to be kind of like Raja Yoga. No, sorry, not Raja Yoga. Agni Yoga, which sounds Eastern, but it's actually theosophic, like early Blavatskyan theosophy, maybe mixed with some Eastern concepts, but it's interesting. It's interesting. Anyway, Let's keep going. Let's keep going. So after this talk with the important Russian being, I soon got ready, and several days after, left Egypt together with him. 2 weeks later, we were already in the chief place of existence in this large community in the town at that time still called St. Petersburg. So they went to St. Petersburg straight up. It's crazy. I also really appreciate this small paragraph here. He went from Egypt to Russia in this one. He could have done a Gurdjieff and he could have stretched this out for an entire chapter, but he didn't, and all the things they did along the way. But nonetheless, he's a bro and he just did it in a paragraph. Thank you, Gurdjieff. Even though, you know, the rest of this chapter is like 80 pages. But yeah, we'll keep going. We'll keep going. So, after we arrived there, my new acquaintance immediately gave himself up to his own affairs, which had very greatly accumulated during his long absence. So the guy went back to paperwork immediately. By that time, among other things, there had already been finished there the construction of that large building which was destined by the trusteeship to this aim of struggling against alcoholism. So literally this like Alcoholics Anonymous, the building. And my new acquaintance immediately began to apply himself to the organization and preparation of all that was necessary for what they call there the inauguration of that building and the starting of the activities connected with it. I began, however, during that time to go about everywhere, as is usual for me, and to frequent the beings of this city belonging to various what are called their classes, in order to become acquainted with the characteristic particularities of their manners and customs. Well, it was then that I constated, among other things, that in the presences of the beings belonging to just this contemporary community, there, as it is called, ego-individuality, began during the recent centuries to form itself particularly sharply dual. Okay, that's interesting. So he's gone to Russia, he's checking out all the different classes of people in St. Petersburg, and he says ego-individuality is sharply dual. So is he talking about the conscious-subconscious dichotomy he was talking about in previous chapters when he was talking about hypnosis? Or is he talking about personality and essence? Let's see what he says. After I had constated this, and began specially to investigate this question there, I finally elucidated that this dual individuality obtained in their common presences, chiefly owing to a non-correspondence between what is called the tempo of the place of their arising and existence and the form of their being mentation. Okay. What was the tempo of the place of their arising of existence? Is that just the fast-pacedness of their society? I know there's some like interesting studies in linguistics where they have like languages where people talk faster. There's like sentence structure is just different, and they like package like information differently. And also, I think there's another Gurdjieff concept somewhere where he talks about the different continents release different vibrations. Did he talk about this in like chapter 20 or chapter 23 when he's talking about the 7 different types of like science that the Occultan Society perfected? And there's like different continents produce different vibrations which are absorbed by the different peoples, and then that creates art differently, but specifically the architecture of each continent is different because of the vibrations. I'm just wondering on this little sentence here. But anyway, and then of course, form of their being mentation. We live in a society, and so people think different. In my opinion, my boy, you will very well understand this particularly sharp duality of the beings of this large community if I repeat to you word for word the opinion about them of our esteemed Mullah Nasser Eddin, which he gave me personally. You know, we haven't met Mullah yet. Like, when did Beelzebub meet the Mullah Nasser Eddin? Or did he not meet him and it's just like a guy who he thought was very wise? Like, it's like the Occultan Society, Ashyat Shayamash, and then this dude, Mullah Nasser Eddin. It's like, these are the 3 good things that came out of the planet Earth, apparently. Which he gave me personally. And it's just which Mullah gave me personally. So when did you meet him, Beelzebub? When did you meet him? Anyway, it is necessary for me to tell you that during the second half of this last sojourn of mine among your favorites, I happened more than once to meet that terrestrial unique... Oh, okay, here we go. Mullah Nasruddin, and to have... Because it was getting to the last one. This is the last sojourn of Beelzebub. Like, I wonder if Gurdjieff, like, forgot and then just, like, realized, oh, I gotta shoehorn him in here, eh? And to have personally exchanged of opinion with him on various, as it is said there, life questions. Hold up. Okay, is he going to talk about his meeting with Mullah Nasruddin? So keep in mind, this is a chapter about Russia, about alcoholism. He was in Egypt. He started talking to a Russian guy. He went to Russia, offhand mentions Mullah Nasruddin, and is now going off on a tangent of how he met Mullah Nasruddin. Keep this. This is why this chapter is so long. God damn it. Gurdjieff is going to do this to us again. Let's see. Let's see what goes. Hey, another guy's in the chat. Yo, another guy. This personal meeting of mine with him, in the course of which he, with a wise saying of his, defined the real essence of the beings of that large community there, took place on one of the parts of the surface of your planet called Persia, in a locality named Ispahan, where I happened to be for my investigations concerning the most saintly activities of Ashiata Shaimash. That's interesting. So he investigated Ashiata Shaimash primarily in Ispahan, which is located in Persia. This is another tilt towards Ashiata Shaimash being a cognate or partially connected to Zarathustra. So we never truly find out who historically Gurdjieff is referring to when he talks about Ashiata Shaimash, but it seems like he has characteristics of Zarathustra, he has characteristics of Hermes. He's a composite being, and this is another hat tip towards, you could say, Zarathustra. Because it's like, he may not be able to go through and say like, oh, all these people are good, but it's a hat tip at least to Zarathustra was a guy who did good stuff for humanity, and maybe Hermes is a guy who did good stuff for humanity, that kind of thing. So, and also, for clearing up on the spot that question I needed of just how there arose for the first time the form of their so-called politeness, now everywhere existing there and also maleficent for them. Even before my arrival in Ispahan, I already knew that the esteemed Mullah Nasruddin had left for the town... Oh boy. Okay, get those shot glasses ready, boys. Talai al-Tnik Talai al-Tnik It's this right here. So, because you go Tal... No, you go Talai, and then Al, and then just right after an Al is a TM, like bruh. Talai al Snikum. Talai al Snikum. That's a tough one, bros. I'm not gonna lie. To stay with the stepson of the eldest daughter of his godfather... Well, hold on a second. Mullah Nasruddin left for the town Tal al-Snikhun to stay with the stepson of the eldest daughter of his god... So he has a godfather who has a daughter, and the daughter has a stepson. So the daughter married a guy who already had kids, and Mullah Nasruddin is staying with that guy. The stepson of the eldest daughter of his godfather. So his godfather has an eldest daughter. No, sorry, it's the so the steps... Yeah, what? Okay. Oof. That right there, big troll. So anyway, Mullah Nasruddin is staying at a place. After I had arrived in this latter town, so he's, at the moment, he's in Russia, but he's telling us a story of when he was in Persia investigating Ashiata Shaimash. He met Mullah Nasruddin, who was staying with the stepson of the eldest daughter of his godfather. After I had arrived in this latter town, I immediately sought him out. And the whole time I was there, often visited him, sitting on the roof, as was custom in this country. We would chat together about every kind of what are called their subtle philosophic questions. Once on the second or third day, apparently, after my arrival there, on going to him in the morning, my eye was struck by an unusual movement in the streets. everywhere there were being cleaned, swept, and hung out, what are called carpets, shawls, flags, and so on. I thought, evidently, one of the two celebrated annual festivals of the beings of this community is beginning. On ascending to the roof, and having exchanged the usual greetings with our dear most eminent and wise Mullah Nasruddin, I asked, pointing with my hand to what was happening in the street, what it was all about. Over his face spread his customary benevolent and as always enchanting grimace, which nevertheless had a slight shade of contempt, and he intended to say something, but at that moment there resounded in the street resounded in the street below the shouts of the town criers and the clattering of many horses. Then our wise mullah, without uttering a word, got up heavily, and having taken me by the sleeve, led me to the edge of the roof, and then winking cunningly at me with his left eye. There's lots of detail here for... So they were sitting down, and then Beelzebub noticed someone like putting carpets up, and was like, "Oh, the festival's about to start." Mullah was about to say something, but then they heard a cry from the street. He got up and pulled him by the sleeve, and now they're looking over the edge, and he winked with his left eye. He turned my attention to a big cavalcade, which was rapidly galloping past, which consisted, as I later found out, chiefly of beings who were called Cossacks, belonging to that same large community there, Russia. Okay, wait, are they in... Are these Cossacks in Persia, or are these... Did he just troll me, and he met Mullah Nasruddin in Russia? Are they in Russia now? Okay, let's just keep reading and see where this goes. In the center of this large cavalcade, there rolled by what is called a Russian phaeton. Phaeton. Okay. So, for those who don't know the myth of Phaeton, is that how you pronounce that? This is a Greek myth. This is a son of Apollo. You know the Greek myths, they all end in tragedy because it's such a hubris. Basically, Phaeton was a son of Apollo, and Apollo didn't know he had him. And so when they finally met, Apollo was like rejoicing, and he was like, "Oh, my lost son, you're finally back. Let me fulfill a wish of yours, because you're badass, clearly." And Phaeton was like, "Sweet, I've always wanted to drive your solar chariot." And Apollo was like, "Oh, can you choose anything other than that?" And Phaeton's like, "No, bro, you said give me a wish." And it's like Apollo couldn't go back on his word, and so he had to give Phaeton a ride on his chariot. It's like, you want to let me like hold the reins with your son? And Phaeton's like, no, I got this, Dad. And Apollo's like, oh shit. And the whole thing about this story is Phaeton drives the sun chariot, and the sun horses are just so hardcore that he just can't control them. And he's like, oh, and it's just that, you know, that era of like, he just can't control the sun horses, and like they bring the sun too close to the earth, and it's the opposite of a flood myth. It burns all the water off of like earth, and everyone almost dies from a drought. And this is like where, in the Greek myths, this is where black people come from. It's like the sun gets so close to the earth, some people get burnt by it so badly that their skin stays black, and that's why there are black people. But the whole thing is Zeus looks down and is like, ooh, we're not supposed to be killing all these people yet. And so he like lightning bolts Phaeton, and then the horses shoot up back into the sky, and Apollo like is lamenting and like crying, and brings the horses back, and I think he picks up his son's corpse and like smacks him into the stars or something. But that's like the Phaeton myth. Phaeton, he's a badass Greek hero, son of Apollo. When they meet, he does a complete, ignorance, out of ignorance and innocence, he's like, yeah, one wish. Oh, dude, let me drive your sun chariot, and just completely overestimates his strength. Even as a demigod, he doesn't realize that, like, war gods, like Ares and even Zeus, struggle with the chariot. Like, it's like something that really only Apollo can do. But anyway, so a Russian Phaeton, so a Russian charioteer. Maybe this is where he's going. Someone has lost control of their chariot. Let's see where he's going with this. Harnessed with 4 horses, driven by an unusually fat and imposing-looking coachman. Okay. This imposing exterior, also quite Russian in manner, was due to the pads put in corresponding parts under his clothes. I think he's got a huge, you know what I mean, boys? Codpiece, I believe is the term. So there's a guy, a fat Russian guy, Cossack, with a massive codpiece, like riding on four horses. This is the thing, Gurdjieff, he's against the imagination, but in this little like story here, he's using all of these terms and like filling our head with a string of images. Let's see where these images are supposed to, where this path is taking us. So a giant codpiece man. This phaeton sat two beings. So under his good, in this phaeton sat two beings, one of the type, that country of Persia, and the other the typical, what is called Russian general. So in the chariot bay, there's like a Russian guy and a Persian guy. Oh, is this like he's gonna do the chariot metaphor Gurdjieff talks about, where he talks about kind of the bodies, and he says there's the horse, there's the chariot, there's the driver, and then there's the master inside. And so in this case, it's the horse. This is the horses, and there's the reins, and then there's the guy driving is Persian, and then there's the Russian, the person who's the master. But the whole thing is they don't speak the same language, so they can't communicate, and the horses are going everywhere, and it's to be a balanced being. These are the cylinders. The emotion, the intellect, and you need the cylinders correctly in place. Is this where he's going? I'm just guessing this is where he's going. So, when the said cavalcade had moved off a long way, Mullah, first of all uttering his favourite saying, so and so must be. Do not do what must not be. Very wise words. And having also uttered his favourite exclamation, somewhat resembling Zert. That sounds like something like a mumble rapper would like say at the end of a sentence. Zert. He returned to his place and suggested to me that I should do the same. So Mullah Nasruddin, first R.I.P., he would have loved mumble rap. Then, having arranged the still smouldering charcoal on his kaylan, I assumed, smouldering charcoal in his zaylan, Mullah Nasruddin, there in Persia, I'm pretty sure this is a shisha pipe. He sighed deeply and pronounced the following tirade, which, as always, was not immediately understandable. Just now, in the company of a large number of well-bred turkeys, a crow of this country passed by, who, although one of the chiefs and of high rank, was yet nevertheless rumpled and badly molting. He's going to talk about people as birds now. During recent times, I don't know why high-ranking crows of this country no longer in general take a single step without these well-bred turkeys. They evidently do this in the hope that maybe, perhaps the pitiable remains of the feathers would, owing to their being constantly within the powerful radiations of these turkeys, become a little stronger and cease to fall out. Okay, I don't know why high-ranking crows of this country no longer in general take a single step without these well-bred turkeys. So the crows are hanging out with the turkeys for some reason. Basically, he's saying maybe they think hanging out with these guys and getting hit heaps and just falling into error will basically strengthen them. Oh my god, that's good. Although I understood positively nothing about what he had just said, yet already well knowing his habit of expressing himself first of all allegorically, I was not at all surprised and did not question him, but patiently awaited his further explanation. Pretty sure there's a bit in Surtur Miraculous where like Gurdjieff says something about Russians being like half-half, and he calls them turkeys or something. Or he calls them turkeys or peacocks. I think maybe that's where he's gonna talk about this a little further on. And indeed, let's keep going forward. And indeed, when after he had pronounced the tirade and had thoroughly finished hubble-bubbling, lol, the water in his kaylan, he, while giving in his subsequent speech with the subtle venom, which is proper to him, a definition of the whole presence and general essence of the beings of the contemporary community Persia, explained to me that he compared the beings of this same community, Persia, to the birds crows. So Persians are crows, okay, or Asiatic people are crows. I think is what he's going to go. Kaylan equal water bong, asked Tyler. Yeah, I think it's a shisha pipe. I'm pretty sure it's like a shisha pipe. Or some kind of contraction like that. You know, like when you see, if you type in like Sultan into like Google Images and you see like a guy on like pillows with a turban and he's got like that pipe and he, you know, with the hose and he just like sucks on the pipe or bubbles. So it's kind of like an opium pipe water bong thing. Yeah, I assume that's the kind of contraption that he's got with him. They're just laying down like doing the shisha together. Having a chit chat of a philosophical chit chat. While the beings of the large community Russia, who formed just that cortege which had galloped along the street, he compared to the birds turkeys. So Russians are turkeys, Persians or perhaps Asiatic people are crows. He developed this thought of his in a long dissertation thus: if we analyze impartially and sum up statistically this understanding and picturing which obtain among people of the contemporary civilization concerning the races which populate Europe, in contradistinction to other continents, and make an analogy between these races and birds, then the people who represent the very tzimus of contemporary European civilizations, namely those who arise and dwell on the continent Europe, must infallibly be called peacocks. That is, the birds who have the most beautiful and most gorgeous exterior. Ghoul in the chat asks, same crow people as Saturn crow people then? No, I think he's using this as a different, oh, maybe. Maybe that's a... If Beelzebub is also a cognate for Gurdjieff. So Beelzebub's Saturnian crow friends is basically a reference to Gurdjieff going to Asia and learning alchemy. And that crow guy, Har is then some like Asiatic Chinese alchemist or something. That's a really interesting idea, yeah. But anyway, Gurdjieff is saying the Europeans are the most pretty boys. Namely, those who arise and dwell in the continent Europe must infallibly be called peacocks, because they have the most gorgeous exterior, while the people who dwell on other continents must be called crows, that is, the most good-for-nothing and dirty of all birds. Oh. But for those contemporary people who obtain the basis and the required conditions for their arising on the basis of Europe, and who are formed on it, but whose subsequent life, and consequently further suffering, proceeds for some reason or other on other continents, and also for those contemporary people who, on the contrary, appear on God's earth, on any continent, obtain their further stuffing under the conditions arising, reigning on the continent Europe, no better comparison can be found than the bird turkey. Hold up, what was that? For those contemporary, obtain the basis that is required for their arising, on the continent Europe, and who are formed on it, but whose subsequent life and consequent... Okay, so he's basically saying half-breed. So this is the, yeah. Gurdjieff says something similar to this in Search of the Miraculous, where he says, like, Russians, they have the bodies of Europeans, but they have, like, the minds of Asians. So they're, like, half-half. They think like the Asiatic people. They have Asiatic minds, but they have European bodies, and so they're, like, half-half. And so here he's saying it's like, there are different people. Some people, the people who are turkey, so there are some people who are peacocks, some people who are crows, and then there are people who have European bodies, or the bodies of peacocks, but they're stuffing, the thing inside, their thoughts, their thinking, comes from one or another continent. So it's like half peacock, half crow makes a turkey, is basically what he's saying. So no better comparison can be made than the bird, the turkey. So what's the metaphor? This latter bird, more than all other birds, expresses something which is neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring, but which represents itself, as is said, a half with a quarter plus 3/4. A half with a quarter plus 3/4. So 1.5? These representatives of these turkeys are the contemporary people of Russia. And it was by these turkeys, namely, that one of the chief crows of this country was surrounded, who not long ago rapidly passed us by. So there's a leader of Persia, a crow, surrounds himself with turkeys. These Russians, moreover, correspond ideally to this peculiar bird turkey, as the following considerations of mine show. Arising and being formed on the continent Asia, but chiefly owing to a clean hereditary, organic, as well as psychic, forged in the course of many centuries in conditions of existence obtained on the said continent, they became in all respects the possessors of the nature of Asiatic people, and consequently they should also, at the present time, be crows. But in view of the fact that in recent times they have all been striving hard to become Europeans, and have with intent been thoroughly stuffing themselves accordingly, they thereby little by little are ceasing to be crows, and as according to several undoubtedly lawful data they cannot turn into real peacocks, they, leaving the crows behind and not yet reaching the peacocks, are in themselves, as I have said, ideally turkeys. Very interesting. I wonder what a Gurdjieff would think nowadays of kind of Russia just cordoning its off and doing its own thing. Maybe they finally evolved beyond the turkey-peacock dichotomy. Although the turkey is a very useful bird for the household because it's meat, if, of course, the turkey is killed in that special way which people of old nations have there learned, thanks to long centuries of practice, is better and more tasty than that of all other birds. Yet in its living state, the turkey is a very strange bird, yeah they are, and has a certain very special psyche, to understand which, even though only approximately, is, especially for our people, with their half-passive minds, quite impossible. One of the many specific features of the psyche of this strange bird is that the turkey, why I don't know, so a Russian person, I don't know, considers it always necessary to swagger, and thus will often, for no reason whatever, puff himself out. So he's basically saying Russians love to swagger. Even when nobody is looking at him, he swaggers and puffs himself out, though he does so, in this case exclusively, because of his own imagination and silly dreams. Lol. Having said this, Mullah Nasruddin got up slowly and heavily, and again pronouncing his favorite saying, so-and-so, this must be it, but this time with the ending, don't sit long where you shouldn't sit, took me by the arm, and together we descended from the roof. Here, my boy, while giving the subtlety of the psychological analysis of our most wise Mullah Nasruddin, its due justice demands that it should be said that if these Russians have become such exemplary turkeys, we have in this case to blame it only once more on those beings of the community Germany. So blame the Germans again. This is hilarious. The beings of Germany, remember he was dunking on the Germans a little while back as well. The beings of Germany were in this case guilty, owing to the fact that when they invented their famous aniline dyes, they overlooked one of the specific peculiarity of these dyes. The point is that with the help of these dyes, it is possible to dye all natural colors except one, only namely, genuine natural black, any other color. And it is thanks to this lack of foresight in these German beings that scandalous misfortune for the poor Russians came about. Okay, let's see. That is to say, it is owing to the fact that the feathers of the crows are dyed by nature, as it unsuspectingly and unexpectedly turned out, just a genuine black, which even with these aniline dyes invented by themselves, cannot possibly be dyed any other color, owing to the said vile imperfection of these dyes, that these poor Russian crows cannot therefore possibly become peacocks. And what is worst of all, having ceased to be crows, and not yet having become peacocks, they willy-nilly turn into the bird turkey, which expresses ideally, as has been formulated by our dear teacher, half with a quarter plus 3/4. That's interesting. Because there's that thing about, Russian, they're Slavs, but then their ruling class has always been more kind of Scandinavian-ish, Germanic-ish. Like, the Rus actually being like a Viking clan. So they've always had this kind of half 50-50 thing going. That's interesting about the dyes. Yeah, they've got an interesting identity though. Hmm. And of course, it's the. So what's this got to do with the German dye? There's something very interesting there. Well, thanks to the wise definition of the esteemed Mullah Nassereddin, which he told me himself, I clearly understood for the first time why all the beings of that large community there, when they reach responsible age, become possessors of so sharply dual an individuality. Because I think in Russia, a lot of them tried to become more German at one point. Like a lot of Russian, because of also communism, you never forget, Karl Marx wrote in German, and like pretty much every single Russian intellectual learnt German just to read the manifesto, and it's like original language. So there's all this kind of weird interbleeding with that. So maybe he's like kind of commenting on that aspect as well. Gurdjieff is commenting on that aspect of the Russians trying to make themselves more European. I guess it totally makes sense around the time he was living in. But enough about this. Listen further now to the events in which I happened to take part after my arrival in the chief place of existence of the community Russia, then called St. Petersburg. As I have already said, while my acquaintance, the said important Russian, settled up his affairs which had become disorganized during his absence, I began to go about everywhere and meet beings there of different, as is said, class and position, in order to study the characteristic particularities of their manners and customs, and to make clear for myself the cause of their so-called organic need for alcohol, and the manifest consequences also of the result of its effects on their common presences. Okay, so we're circling back to his trying to figure out why Russians are such big alcoholics. It is interesting to remark that during these meetings of mine with the various three-brained beings belonging to various castes and positions, I had already by then constated several times, and it had, after more attentive observation, become quite evident to me that the majority of them carried in themselves the germ of that particular functioning of their common presences which had already long before been habitually arising in your favorites owing to a certain combination of two independent causes coming from outside. The first of these causes is a common cosmic law which exists under the name Sulionensius. And the second is a sharp deterioration of the conditions of the usual being existence of the beings on some part or other of the surface of the planet of yours. Okay, so a cosmic law, what is it? Let's see what he says about it. I speak about that germ of the particular functioning of their common presences, which after several of their years becomes molded in the presence of all beings of this community in such a usual form as had already during certain definite periods become in general inherent in them, and as had become what is called a stimulating factor for their specific manifestations, which also become proper only to three-brained beings of the planet Earth. And the totality of these manifestations among the beings of the large community was this time called their Bolshevism. Ooh, we're getting deep, boys. We're getting deep. Okay, so Gurdjieff is about to dunk on Bolshevism. So there's factors, these are, we live in a society, and therefore society molds our essence or doesn't let it grow, and it warps when our personality comes in and our personality takes shape. And so he's gonna talk about this interplay here, that interplay between essence and personality. Let's see what he says. I will explain to you later about this same particular functioning of their common presences. Okay, never mind then. I touched upon this question in this place only to give you a representation of the already particular abnormal conditions of being existence among which my activities among the beings of this large community flowed at this period during the sojourn of mine in their chief place of existence, St. Petersburg. Okay. Even before my arrival in the city, I had had in view to actualize one of my intentions for the fulfillment of which everything that was necessary had been already prepared by me. Okay, so he wanted to actualize one of his intentions. What is it? The point is that already long before this, I had intended to set up in one or other of their great inhabited spots a something of the kind of what they call there a chemical laboratory. So he wanted to do some alchemy, in which I intended by means decided on beforehand to proceed with special experiments on several deeply concealed aspects of their ever the same strange psyche. And so, my boy, when I had stayed in this city, and when I discovered that almost half my time there might be free, I decided to make use of the chance of being temporarily half occupied and set about the actualization of this intention of mine. So he started concocting some brews in Russia to experiment. From the information I obtained, I learned that in order to set up such a laboratory there, it was obligatorily required, first of all, to have a permit from the local power-possessing beings, and that is why I quickly began to take steps to get this permit. The first steps I took showed me that, on account of the laws which had been so long before fixed in the process of existence of this community, a permit to have the right to have one's own chemical laboratory had to be issued there by a certain what is called department of one of their what are called ministries. So he faces Russian bureaucracy. That is why I betook myself to that same department. But it turned out that although the staff of this, like how you get held up by a DMV and you have to go through lines, I feel like this is what that sensation he is cultivating in this chapter. With these long paragraphs, basically saying how hard it is to get a license. A license for that. That is why I betook myself to the same department, but it turned out that although the staff of this department acknowledged that it was their obligation to issue that kind of permit, yet they themselves did not know how it had to be done. And they did not know this, as I later understood, simply because no one had ever applied to them for this permit, and on this account, these unfortunate beings had not acquired the customary for them what is called automatic habit for the manifestation of such a being duty as theirs of this kind. Here it must in general be noticed that during the last centuries, almost every being manifestation for the fulfillment of their being duty in the presences of these beings who became power-possessing is already actualized thanks exclusively only to the functioning of the data which are formed in them from manifold automatic repetitions of the same thing. Be noticed that during the last centuries, almost every being manifestation. Yeah, so he's basically just commenting here that pretty much humanity nowadays is completely mechanized. The only being manifestations you see are just the automatic ones that are embedded in us through our habitual training. As regards the power-possessing beings of this community, the crystallization of these peculiar automatic being data at this period of the flow of time proceeded in them much more intensely than anywhere else, and was expressed so sharply that sometimes it even seemed as if... Ooh, I think I dropped there. I think I dropped there for a second. Hopefully I'm coming back. Boop. We still live? Oh, we dropping a little bit. Okay, we all back? We all back? Okay, let's keep going, let's keep going. Of this chief place of existence needed a chemical laboratory. No one, on the contrary, never had there been in that town so many similar chemical laboratories as at this very period of the flow of time. Yeah, my KP, my bits seem to dip every now and then. Okay, well, we're an hour in. Let's keep going, let's keep going. And doubtless all the owners of the necessary permits had produced them from somewhere or other in some other way. We didn't miss anything important. He's just talking about permits still, so if it drops, it drops. They could not help having them. It was just for this, that there existed in this chief place of their existence, as in general there exists in all large and small communities, in terms of peace, a particular, as they say, administrative body, which comprises the basic hope of complete bliss for power possessors, which they themselves call the gendarmerie, or gendarmerie. Ooh. So I'm not sure if that's a normal word or not, but whatever. And police. Okay, so he's talking about police now. One of the chief obligations of the representatives of which is to see that everybody, for every kind of enterprise there, should have a corresponding permit. This is literally, you got a license for that. And indeed, it must not be supposed that the what are called lynx-eyed beings representatives of the said basic hope of a complete bliss for power possessors would let anything slip by and allow anywhere, any laboratory, whatever, without the corresponding permit from the power possessors. A basic reason for this seeming contradiction was something quite different. It is necessary to tell you that there already in this community, the attitude towards the laws and regulations fixed in the past by the beings for normal, according to their understanding, mutual relationship, and in general for ordinary existence, began to become such that only those of the ordinary beings could obtain and profit by everything to which they had objective right, who knew how to act to the contrary, i.e. against laws and regulations existing there. Are we dropping again, boys? Of these private laboratories, such as I wished to set up, not one, but thousands could there be had. It was merely necessary to know, first of all, that abnormal goings and comings were the practice for procuring the permits for these laboratories, and then to act in accordance with these abnormalities. Little choppy, says Tyler. Yeah, sorry about that. I, however, on account of the short time I had stayed there, had not yet had time to make clear for myself all the subtleties of the ordinary being existence which had begun in this community, and as I said, to become particularly abnormal. You have to become adjusted to the abnormalities of the culture you're in to really be able to flow in it properly. Yeah, I don't know, my frame rate just keeps dropping. Someone send me a link later to, like, some tips for, like, streaming to help my bitrate, I guess. Anyway. That is, you know, he's just talking about license guys at the moment. We haven't missed anything. That is why, when I set out to take steps to get the permit I required there, began for me those endless vexations, or as they themselves say in such cases, the idiotic dilly-dallyings which were also fixed not long before in the process of their being existence, and in addition all this turned out in the end to be quite without result and unnecessary. It began with this. It was only a kiss. It was only a kiss. When I had reached the aforesaid department and addressed myself to the staff there, they all began to eye each other perplexedly and to whisper. Together, several of them rummaged through fat tomes in the hopes, obviously, of finding some written rule about the issuing of these permits. Finally, the oldest of them came toward me, importantly required from me that I should first of all bring him from a certain other department certain information concerning my personal, as they express it, loyalty. So this is the, he's now stringing us about the way they strung him about. This is the old, you need a thing from this department, and then you go to that department, and they say, oh, you need one from this one, and you just go around in a circle. It was from just this that my partner, that my further endless perambulations began, from one department to another, from, as they say, one administration to another, from one official specialist to another, and so on without end. Thus the business continued until, from the so-called district officer, I had to go to the so-called parish priest, and so on, all but to the official city midwife. Besides this, one of the departments, why I don't know, required that a certificate issued by another department should be stamped by a third. In one department, I had to sign a certain paper, in another to answer questions having nothing to do with chemistry, while in a third it was explained to me, and I was advised, how I must manage with the equipment of the laboratory so as not to be poisoned, and so on and so forth. It turned out as I later elucidated that I had been without at all suspecting it at the time, with an official among whose obligations was that of dissuading from this abominable intention those who wished to set up chemical laboratories. But the most amusing of all was that for obtaining this permit it was necessary in turn to apply to those official servants, who had not even the remotest notions of what in general a laboratory was. I do not know how all this would have finished, if, having wasted almost 2 months, I had not myself in the end thrown up all these foolish hustlings around. I threw them all up for a reason which was not without its humour. According to the rules of these senseless dilly-dallyings, I had to get, among others, a paper from a doctor official, also certifying that no danger would menace my personal health from my occupation in this laboratory. I went to this official doctor, but when he first of all desired to sound me thoroughly, and for this requested me to undress entirely, so that he may tap me all over with his little hammer, I could not, of course, in any way consent. And I could not consent to this because if I had bared myself, I would have inevitably betrayed my tail, which there on your planet I skillfully hid under the folds of my dress. And you, of course, will understand that if any of them would have seen it, then everyone would very soon have known I was not a being of their planet, after which it would have become already entirely impossible to remain among them and to continue the experiments interesting to me for the elucidation of the strangeness of their psyche. Oh man, I think I froze again a little bit. Oh no. We back. That is why I went from this doctor without the paper necessary for me, and from that time I threw up everything and no longer tried to obtain a permit to set up my own laboratory. In spite of the fact that I went about there everywhere, pursuing my special aim, hustling at the same time for the said permit, I nevertheless often met the important Russian, my first acquaintance, who, although he was, as I said, very busy with his own affairs, nevertheless found time to visit me to receive me at his house, or to receive me at his house. At these meetings, we almost always talked only about the alcoholism in his fatherland, and about the measures for struggling with this evil. From such an exchange of opinion, there each time accumulated in me more and more material, as my impartial observations and studies of all the aspects of the psyche of the local beings were crystallizing in me, always never and newer data concerning them. This important Russian laid very great weight on my considerations and remarks on what had already been done by the trusteeship of People's Temperance, and also concerning the projects of future undertakings, and was always sincerely delighted by the justice of my observations. And in the beginning, all my suggestions which he reported at the general meetings of the trusteeship were always accepted for actualization. But when several participants of the trusteeship accidentally learned that the initiative for many useful measures had issued from me, some foreign doctor or other, not even a European, then every kind of habitual, as it is called, intrigue and protest arose amongst the proposals coming from me, and also against the head of the trusteeship himself. Ooh, once again, like, this is perfect description of bureaucratic nonsense. Like, this could give anyone PTS flashbacks who has worked in anything like a government office. Those guilty of all the misunderstandings which led up to this sorrowful end to such an important institution as the trusteeship created for the welfare of all the three-brained beings of this many-millioned community were always, and in everything, the learned beings of new format. The point is that owing to the insistence of certain hereditary power-possessing beings there among the number of the permanent chief participants of this new institution, several what are called learned physicians, they happened to be among the leaders of this trusteeship in consequence of the fact that in the presences of the hereditary power-possessing beings of that period, there had again already become finally fixed and had become the inviolable part of their essence, always the same inner overlord of theirs, maleficent for the terrestrial three-brained beings named by them self-calming, which by itself became for those unfortunates the sense and aim of their existence. And therefore, in order not to make any being effort at all, they insisted that these learned physicians should also unfailingly take part in this important institution, of the great social significance. Bruh. In recent times, why I don't know the beings of this profession most often became learned beings of new format. It is further also necessary to tell you here that when from among these learned beings of new format some became power-possessing and happened to take up important responsible posts in the process of ordinary existence, they then often served much more as the sources of every kind of subsequent misunderstanding than the hereditary power-possessing beings. Yeah. So it's the whole, if you have power-possessing beings, they don't rule properly, but then new power-possessing beings that reach a level, the new format. You get rid of the old guard and you put some new guys in, Bolshevikism, get rid of the aristocrats, we'll put the proletariat in. They just, it works even worse. It works even worse. And they serve these sources of misunderstandings, obviously in consequence of this. That in the common presences of these beings, there are acquired, and in a particular way, are interwoven the characteristic inherences which had already become proper to your favorites of three quite different contemporary types, namely power-possessing beings, learned beings of new format, and the contemporary professional physicians. And so, my boy, on the initiative and insistence of several hereditary power-possessing beings of that community, especially on that of those who, although they outwardly still continue to be power-possessing, yet in inner significance are only as they are called empty sandboxes, deflated gas bags, lol. So and that's so funny, he puts that in brackets. It's like he really wanted to just shoehorn that in, call power-possessing beings deflated gas bags. They were called to power for the business of actualizing such a serious task as the relative saving of many millions of beings similar to themselves, those genuine stuffed turkeys, or as they would be called there, upstarts. Oof. So he's just digging into bureaucracy. While at first, these same upstarts who had by chance received power carried on among themselves alone every kind of petty intrigue proper to them, it was still for the general undertaking there only half a calamity. But when, thanks to every kind of what is called subterfuge, also proceeding from them, there also began these intrigues between all the participants of this trusteeship, and all the split up into different notorious parties, which pernicious custom, therefore a successful actualization of every promising beginning is very widely spread, then also such a good beginning as this trusteeship for the general welfare of contemporary three-brained beings began, as they say, to crack at the seams. Those petty intrigues of theirs proceeded in full between the separate parties as well as between the separate members of that absolutely indispensable state organization, just at the same time I arrived with my first Russian acquaintance in the chief place of existence of the said community. Ghoul says, gonna start calling people stuffed turkeys as an insult now. Yeah, I know, right? Stuffed with what? Nonsense. Then those upstarts, who had accidentally received power, learned that many of the counsels and indications of the business of improving the organization proceeded from me, that is, just from a professional like themselves, but who was not included in their so-called corporation. Well, just then understanding well that none of their intrigues and subterfuges could have any significance at all for me, they directed them against the head of the trusteeship chosen by themselves. It is apropos, very interesting, lightly to remark here, that although every kind of data for bringing forth various being impulses, which they should have, are in general feebly crystallized in the presences of these contemporary professionals there, then the data which brings forth the impulse called corporate feeling, for some reason or other, is crystallized and functions in them very strongly. So it's one of those big contradictions. People will want an aim to be actualized, so they'll get together in a group, and then something doesn't go their way, and they will deliberately sabotage everyone, themselves, the group, out of doing its function that they wanted to have function anyway. It's like all of these guys in this trusteeship, in this institution, wanted to help the public. It's like, so what if your ideas don't come from you and they come from another field? Who cares? Who cares? If it helps people, it helps people. But for some reason, stuff like this always happens. It's insane. And so, my boy, there we go, a break in the paragraph. As long as I did not yet know that to be occupied with intrigues and dodges, or as sometimes they themselves still express it, mutually to get rid of each other, is already unavoidably inherent in power-possessing beings of this community, I still hoped for and patiently awaited that time when eventually the corresponding conditions would give me the possibility of actualizing my fundamental aim, namely the possibility of proceeding with the elucidatory experiments on the psyche of the terrestrial beings en masse. But when it became definitely clear to me that here in this community, under the existing conditions of reciprocal relationships, it would be impossible for me to succeed in this, I also became convinced that it was impossible to get one's own chemical laboratory there honestly, i.e., strictly according to the laws fixed in this community. I decided to remain there no longer, but to depart in order to seek suitable conditions for my said aim to some other European community. Oof. Tyler says, I've had this personally happen to me during a group I created during the pandemic. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I've been in groups like that, yeah. Like, good lord. What? What is it? What is it? Well, I mean, we've had it displayed there. It's these elements, strange elements in their psyche. So, when my first acquaintance, the important Russian, learned about this decision of mine, he was greatly grieved. Greatly grieved also were yet several other Russian beings who indeed wished more or less good for their fatherland, and who during this period had had time to become clearly convinced that my knowledge and my experience might be very useful for their fundamental aim. On the day of my suggested departure, this trusteeship was preparing to open the big building which, as I have already told you, was just designed for the aim of the struggle against alcoholism, and which the beings there on the day of its opening called by the name of their Tsar, the People's Building, of the Emperor Nicholas II. Oh, I can see this having an unhappy ending. Olenuker in the chat saying, peace emoji. Hey, Olin. Olena. Olena, girls in the chat confirmed. Oh my god. On the eve of my departure, my first acquaintance, the important Russian, came to me unexpectedly, and having sincerely expressed his regret at my departure, begged me very earnestly to postpone it for several days, so that after the consecration and opening of the said building he might travel with me, and incidentally rest a little from the recent bustle, intrigues, and subterfuges. As I had no special reason to hurry, I agreed, and postponed my departure for an indefinite time. 2 days later, the building opened. So the opening of this building took place, and having the previous evening received what is called an official invitation, I betook myself to that ceremony. Well, at this general state, solemnity of the contemporary many-millioned community, to which came even the himself, as they call him, His Majesty the Emperor, there began in respect of my person, what is called Uret Stak Nilkarulni, which generally speaking always flows from the totality of the surrounding abnormalities, and being formed automatically in the psyche of every one of the three-brained beings of this ill-starred planet, holds them, so to say, in an exitless magic circle. Very interesting. So the Emperor arrived, and there began, in respect of my person, what is called a exitless magic circle. That's interesting. Is that saying like Beelzebub casted that, or it's just like the air of the Emperor all of a sudden, like you know, when someone noble walks in and everyone just kind of sits up straight in their chairs, like, something like that happened. It seems to be this kind of a vibe. There's a concept in ancient Rome called like Imperium, where it's like a substance that you gain, and whoever has more Imperium has more like authority. And it's like, so this guy has more Imperium than this guy and whatnot, and it's like, that's where your titles come from, but it's almost talked about like as a substance. And it's like you walk into a place and your Imperium overpowers someone else's Imperium or something. Like a kind of an anime thing. This sounds almost like an anime thing, like he just walks in and everyone's like, oh, 100% aura, I can't take it. You know, something like that. Anyway, the further events proceeded in the following order. On the day of the said state solemnity, while the ceremony was still proceeding, my first acquaintance, the Russian, suddenly ran toward me, shoving his way through the beings who appeared there in all the blaze of various what are called orders of regimentals, and in a joyous voice told me that I was to have the happiness of being presented to His Majesty the Tsar. Having said this and speaking rapidly, he hurried away. Did Gurdjieff ever meet the Tsar? I don't think so. Maybe this is just like his fan fiction of like, if I met the Tsar, this is what would happen. It turned out that at this solemnity, there he had some conversation with the Emperor about me, as a result of which it had been decided that I should be presented to him. Such a presentation to the Emperor, Tsar, or King is considered there as a very, very great piece of luck, and that is why my acquaintance, having received such a permission, rejoiced beyond words on my behalf. Was the Tsar still living when Gurdjieff came? Gotta look that up. Evidently, he wished by this presentation to give me great pleasure, and by this to calm his own conscience, as he considered himself to blame for my unsuccessful stay in his capital. After this event, 2 days passed. True River King says, never met the Tsar. Rasputin was scared of Gurdjieff and avoided him. Oh, that's interesting. It's very interesting. On the third morning, looking by chance out of the window of my lodging into the street, I saw there quite an unusual commotion. Everyone was cleaning. Everywhere there was sweeping. Many of what are called the Gendarmerie police were walking up and down. To my question as to what caused all this, our Ahun explained to me that on that day in our street, the arrival of a very important general of that community was expected. On this same day in the afternoon, while I was sitting at home and talking with one of my few acquaintances, the concierge of the house came running into me, agitated and bewildered and stammering, exclaimed, His Excellency. But he did not have time to finish before His Excellency entered, just came right in, just bang. As soon as the unfortunate concierge saw him appear, he appeared as if struck dumb by lightning, and then having pulled himself together, he hurriedly, as it is said there, backed out of the room. But His Noble Excellency himself, with a very friendly smile, although what a shade of what is called haughtier characteristic of all the power-possessing beings of that community, at that time came towards me, at the same time examining with great curiosity the antiques which were in my room, and shaking me in a special way by the wrist, sat down in my favorite armchair. Shaking a special way at the wrist, is that because Tsar was a Freemason and Martinist as well, so is that like a reference? Afterward, continuing to examine the antiques, he said, you will in a day or two be presented to our great aristocrats. Ghoul in the chat says, His Excellency entered like the Kool-Aid man, just through a wall. Just, oh yeah. And since it is I who attain these affairs, I have come to you just to explain to you how and what you must do on such a great important occasion of your life. Having said this, he suddenly stood up and approaching what is called a china figure of old Chinese workmanship, which stood in a corner of my room, he exclaimed with impulsiveness, rapture, which thrilled his whole presence, how charming! Where did you get this marvel of ancient wisdom? And not ceasing to look at the said figure and giving himself up to the feeling of his rapture, or more strictly speaking, with all his feeling coursing together through him, he further continued, I myself am very interested in all ancient art, but chiefly in Chinese. That is why, of the 5 rooms given up to my collection, there are filled with productions of ancient Chinese work alone. This is interesting. Russian guy talking about Chinese stuff, continuing to speak in this strain about his adoration for the production of ancient Chinese masters, he, without ceremony, again sat down in my armchair and began to enlarge upon antiques in general, their value and where they are to be found. During this conversation, he suddenly and hastily took his watch from his pocket, automatically looked at it, stood up quickly, and once on his feet said, "How vexing! I am obliged to interrupt our chat. Interesting to the highest degree, as I must hurry home, where doubtless the great friend of my youth and his charming wife are already there waiting." So it sounds like this guy just came in and was like, "Hey, how's it going? I really want you to meet the aristocrats. Hey, is that a Chinese figure? Oh my God, you got to tell me about it. I love Chinese stuff. Whoops, look at the time. Got to get." It's like I don't know. It's like he's got autism or ADD or something, and just like came in, chatted, like just left. Beelzebub was just sitting there like, what? What's going on? He is here for a short time while passing through on his way abroad from the provinces. I have not seen him since we served in the same regiment and received different appointments, I to the court, and he to a civil post. He afterward further added, "And as regards the instructions I am required to give you, about which I had to come give you, I will send my adjutant this very day, and he will explain everything to you, and no worse than I perhaps would." After this, with fussy self-importance, he left me. He's a fussy baka, that Tsar. And indeed, on the evening of the very same day as His Noble Excellency had promised me, one of his adjutants came to my house, who was still, as is said there, a young man. That is, a being who had only quite recently attained to responsible age. This adjutant of his had the very marked specific type of a terrestrial three-brained being who in recent times among your favorites who often come across, and who was very well defined by the words, "Mama's Papa's darling." This former Mama's darling, when he arrived and began to speak to me, manifested himself at first towards me quite automatically according to the data fixed in his common presence by the rules of enforcedly inculcated into him of what are called bon ton. And when a little later it became clear to his being rumination that I belonged neither to his caste nor to a higher one, but appeared to be one of those beings who, according to the abnormal understanding of the beings of that community, are considered little higher than what are called savages, he immediately changed his tone and again quite automatically began to manifest himself toward me to the data for commanding and ordering about, data also already fixed. What a poncy ponce. In the common presences of the beings of that community, of that period, who belonged to that caste, and he began to point out I must enter, leave, and move, and what words must be spoken. Besides the fact that, in the course of 2 hours, he had shown me, by his own example, how, namely, one had to manifest, he declared to me that he would return on the morrow, and he ordered me to practice so that, as he expressed himself, no misunderstanding at all might arise, which might lead to where even Machar did not drive his goats. That sounds like a phrase which is no longer used anymore. When on the day of my, as they call it, supreme presentation, I arrived there where the chief of this large community had the place of his residence, I was met at the railway station itself by His High Excellency, in person, who had arrived there accompanied by 5 or 6 of his adjutants, and from that moment he himself began, of course, quite without the participation of, as it is called, his personal subjective initiative, but guided only by automatic habit acquired by him, thanks to the doing of always one and the same thing, to subjugate all my separate spiritualized parts, and all the self-manifestations of my common presence, taking it, as it were, under the directive of his own eye. So he wanted to command him. From this moment I had, in the sense of my outer manifestations, as our esteemed Mullah Nasruddin would say, to dance in everything to its tune. As soon as we left the station and were seated in the carriage, he immediately began to show me and to prompt me as to what and how I had to act and speak, and what I had to do or say. And then, later, in that hall where the celebrated presentation took place, he further showed and directed my presence. About this we can neither speak now in the language of Scheherazade, nor describe it with the pen of Mr. Cananson. So that's 1001 Nights. What's this reference? We've got some literary references here. Let's go. Bruh. Cananson? It's not showing anything. Canine son. Is this just a joke by Gurdjieff? Canine son is in a dog? That's interesting. Digging up the dog. Is this a marker that Gurdjieff has left to indicate there's something important coming up? Yes, honey. Thank you, honey. You can fill it up with water and I'll have some more. In the moment, oh sorry, my wife's just getting me some more stuff, some sustenance. I'm reaching an hour-and-a-half mark here. Cut that out, pretend you didn't see anything. Now, in the hall, every moment, every step I made, even the blinking of my eyelids, were seen in advance and prompted to me by this important general. Okay, this is interesting. So maybe this is like an eye observing another eye. You know, we self-observe ourselves and we judge each part of ourselves, each part of our mechanical nature. However, because it's interesting, it's the leader of a country you can see is kind of a master. Within us, we have our inner country. The throne is empty, but say there's a king inside us. There is a master. Thank you. There is a master. There is a king inside us. We can't approach the king directly. We need to go through a process. So there's another eye, or kind of a warden, that steps in, and helps train us. A warden, a steward, a deputy steward, and we need to go through this kind of process to get to the master, in a sense. So maybe there's something, you know, he mentions Mr. Canine son there is digging up the dog. You know, there's a bone to dig up here. And now so maybe there's some clues to creating, you know, what's Gurdjieff's system? The deputy steward. Is there something after this? Is there like a warden in between the steward and the master, or does it just go steward master? But anyway, that kind of system of a center of gravity we build within us. Let's just keep that in mind as we go through this next little journey. However, in spite of all the absurdity of this procedure, if one takes into account the perfection of a being depends on the quality and quantity of his inner experiencings, then objective justice demands that due must be given for this to your favorites, that on that day they compelled me, of course unconsciously, to undergo and to feel perhaps more than I had undergone and felt during all the centuries of my personal sojourn there amongst them. Yeah, so even though they themselves were unconscious, they prompted him in such a way that he had to act consciously. So it's interesting. You may go into some places, go into a meeting with your boss, or maybe if you join the military, or maybe you have to act in a certain way, or if you join an institution like the church and you're an altar boy, but you have to participate in a ceremony. You kind of have to, at certain points, become conscious of yourself. You have to undergo something. And even though your teachers may be unconscious, there may actually be something you get out of it. That's kind of interesting. However that may be, I must yet say that having agreed to this famous presentation for the purpose of observation and investigation of the peculiar and such a contorted psyche of your favorites, and after all the great agitation which I had lived through on that day, I finally breathed freely only in the carriage of the train after my tormentors, particularly that important general, had left me alone by myself. In the course of the whole of that day, I was so occupied with the fulfillment of all the innumerable foolish manipulations required from me, and which fatigued me in view of my declining years, that I did not even notice what the unfortunate emperor there looks like or how he manifested himself in this comedy. So that's how you should also look at this life. Things which seem tedious and boring and, going about and this and that, you see it as a comedy. That's how you get through reading like books like the Parmenides by Plato. You treat it like a comedy and it goes by faster. Now, my boy, if you will strive to assimilate well the information about the subsequent events which happened to me, and which were the results of this famous presentation of mine to His Majesty the Emperor, then you will probably acquire the possibility of clearly picturing to yourself and well understand how, there among your favorites, particularly in this large community Russia, at that period their what is called individual significance, particularly in recent centuries, began to be appraised and to be built up, for the majority of these unfortunates always exclusively, on the basis of the outer ephemeral, as they are called, Vietro Yirit Snell. Jesus Christ, what the hell is this word? You got a Y-R, is this an ear? Irit? And then a Z next to an N. Bruh. Ugh. That's a Gurdjieff word if I've ever seen them. Vietro Iret Snell. Ugh. That's a damn it Gurdjieff right there. So built up exclusively on the basis of the outer ephemeral, as they are so-called this, as in the given case it similarly took place in relation to me. This gradual acquiring of the habit of judging the merits of beings according to their outer ephemeral appearance. So judging the appearance of people, this is what is vietro iretznel. That's what that means, when you judge someone by their exterior. Yeah, Jesus Christ, take 5 shots for that one. Oof. So, the judging of the inferior appearance in all other beings developed and continued to develop their imagination, which became strengthened about this, that just in this consists the actualization of being individuality, and all begins subjectively to strive only for this. So because of this principle of judging people via external images, the ephemeral external image, people then strive to develop their external image exclusively, and in a very subjective way as well. So this leads to more damage of the essence and the psyche. That is why at the present time, all of them from the very beginning of their arising gradually lose from their common presences even the taste and desire for what is called objective being. There is objective fashion, baby, and you don't got it. Just a second, let me just drink the rest of this. That's good squishy. Oh yeah. Get that collagen inside me. Okay, let's go. The manifestations of the mentioned Vietro Iretsnel, and it was not only that, it was also like cut in half here. That just threw me completely. Personally, in relation to my person, began to have their action already from the very morning of the following day, in this sense that every data for being notion about my personality, which had been before this already soundly fixed in the presences of all the beings there who knew me, suddenly and sharply changed, thanks only to this objectively maleficent official presentation of me to their highest power-possessing being. So everyone in the trustee institution who was like, oh, we can't listen to this guy, he's just a doctor like us. The fact that he met the Tsar then changes all their minds, and they're like, oh my god, he's got clout. Clout chasing is basically, this is the origin of clout chasing, basically, what Gurdjieff is showing us. My personal significance and their notions about all my qualities and merits also changed for their individuality. I suddenly became, for all important and wise, extraordinary and interesting, and so on and so forth. That is, the possessor of all kinds of abnormal being qualities thought out by themselves. As a very characteristic example, which will well make clear to you what I have just said, the following illustration may serve. The proprietor of that shop where, before going to my business, I bought the provisions for my kitchen, wished on the first morning after this, as it is sometimes said, their royal audience of mine, to bring happen what may my purchases. Jesus, what was the syntax of this sentence? Just a second. The proprietor of that shop where, before going to my business, I brought the provisions for my kitchen, wished on the first morning after this, as is sometimes said, their royal audience of mine, to bring happen what may my purchases home to me himself. Bruh, I think that's just this book's so crazy that just got translated weird. But it's like he went to a kitchen shop and bought some stuff, and then on the day after of his audience with the Tsar, the guy who owned the shop himself brought this things, and it was like, hey, I heard you met the Tsar, or something like that. All the police standing at the street corner in the district in which I temporarily dwelt, and who already knew me well as a newcomer physician, began at the sight of me while standing some way to salute, just as they saluted that important general of theirs. Yeah. So he's basically just saying he got a bunch of clout, and everyone knew him after that. I've been to the Tsar's house, and no one knew you. The same evening, the chief of that department, to which I had first of all applied himself personally, brought me to my house that unfortunate permit. So yeah, so he tried all these things to get a permit, and then as soon as he met the Tsar, just boom, permit. Given me the right to have my own laboratory, and to receive which I had languished for 3 months, waiting on the doorstep of every kind of official and unofficial establishment. And on the second day I received yet 4 other permits for this from various departments of other ministries, into whose province it did not at all enter to issue such permits. So he even got like a forklift permit for nothing, lol. But to whom, on account of this same dilly-dallying of theirs, I had to apply during my senseless bustlings. The owners of the houses, shopkeepers, children, and in general, all who dwelt in the same street as I did, became as admirable with me, as if I intended to leave each of them a large American legacy, and so on and so forth. This is almost funny. After this empty Kralnian happening to me, so just like it was empty, nothing really happened to him, but all of a sudden people just loaded value onto him. By the way, it's like someone, I don't know, you meet an important person, and then all of a sudden, like say you meet Richard Dawkins, and then all of your friends are like, dude, and they just start to respect your opinions on biology, even though you don't even know anything about it. Or you would like, I don't know, who's someone who's actually cool. Hey, High Desert, entered the chat, howdy. Anyway, happening to me, I, by the way, further learned that this unfortunate Tsar of theirs also always prepares himself for such official meetings with beings strange to him, lol. Of these official meetings like this, he has very many almost every day, and even several times a day. Here a parade of the troops there, an audience with the ambassador of some other emperor, in the morning a delegation at noon, a presentation such as mine, later a reception of different what are called representatives of the people, and with each of these it is necessary for him to talk, or even to make them an entire speech. As each word of every such terrestrial Tsar can have, and often does have, serious consequences, not only for the beings of that community, of whom he is Tsar, but also for the beings of other communities. Therefore, each word must be thought out from every side. High Desert says, I effing love this. We all love it and hate it. It's our drug, and we take it. As we do, High Desert. Come with us on a journey through time and space to Russia, apparently. Well, for this, around these emperors or czars, so he's talking about flatterers, I think? You know, isn't this Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes' big, what was this, say? Not critique, what's anti-critique against having a monarchy? Because Thomas Hobbes was pro-monarchy. And one of the big things about a monarchy is like, you know, but don't you just build up flatterers around you who manipulate your monarch? And Thomas Hobbes was like, yeah, but the monarch has all the power. If you decentralize the power into a bunch of different places, you don't stop getting flatterers. What you get is a multiplication of flatterers. It's like you decentralize power into a bunch of different places. Then you get a flatterer for this guy, a flatterer for that guy, a group of flatterers for this other person, and then it's like you multiply flattery. It doesn't actually help. So something like that, strange beings around the Tsar. This is what it sounds like to me, and this is what it seems that Gurdjieff is commenting on. Well, for this, around these emperors or czars who become such by hereditary rights or by election, there are many specialists from among the ordinary three-brained beings there, in order that they... where am I reading? Sorry, I just tripped balls there. They're among many specialists from among the ordinary three-brained beings there, in order that they may prompt them as to what they must do and say in every circumstance. And these, High Desert asks, what's the percentage of benevolent monarchs? Maybe more than you think, but less than you'd assume. I mean, whenever anyone is like, yeah, but has there ever been a good monarch? Yeah, Marcus Aurelius. Boom. Go read, you know, just read some history, bruh. We get, I don't know, monarchs, we got to take a different term here. Monarchs and kings, they kind of get thrown together. There's two different things. There is a person who is a monarch is like the king of a country, a king of a land. And then there's like a person who is another ruler, you could say. Another type of ruler is someone who is a king of a people, who represents a people, not necessarily a land, but they guide that people, and they're the leader of that, an elected leader of that personage. And over time, maybe they evolve into a monarch or things like that, and fluctuate back and forth. It depends. And it's hard because in history, a lot of monarchs get a bad rap because there are some real bad ones, but then there are some that are like, they're just okay. And that's a hard pill to swallow when you're just okay. Because when you're just okay, your country still isn't working on full clip, and if it kind of starts to go downhill. Even if you're working as hard as you can, even if you're not a filthy degenerate, even if you're not corrupt, if you're just an okay monarch, it's still actually not good enough. The weight of the crown is heavy, and you kind of understand over a while, like, why a lot of monarchs kind of just go crazy. Or there's like something called the Sword of Damocles, and sometimes it's used to describe a psychological condition, but it's literally like, for people who don't know the myth, the Sword of Damocles, I think Damocles was a tyrant, a ruler, and he, you know, had all of this stuff attributed to him, but there's I think there's one story where a friend of his comes to one of his big, parties, like a feast, and the friend is like, looking around all of the gold in his palace and all of the, pretty women. And he's like, wow, Damocles, you've really got it made. Man, you must really enjoy life. And Damocles is like, okay, you want to switch with me? Here, sit in my chair. Sit in the good chair with all the best food and all the women and all of this. And it's like, oh, you're going to sit in this chair? But I'm going to do one thing to show you what it's like living as me. And it's like, so he gets his friend to sit in his chair, but then he ties a sword over his head, like by a thread, so it's dangling there by a thread, and it could just fall at any minute and just kill him. And it's like, you can sit in that chair as long as you want, with all of the women, with all of the wine, all of this gold around you, but that sword just has to remain there. And it's like, how long are you going to sit there? And the guy's like, okay, I love this, I love the women, I love the gold, I love all this, but that sword there, knowing that there's a sword there and it can fall at any minute, is just it makes it all horrible. It's horrible. I would, even though there's women, even though there's unlimited wealth, I want to get out of this chair as fast as possible. And then Damocles is like, yeah, and that's what it's like being a monarch, and that's why I chose to be a tyrant, because it's like, it's just hard, bro. And I'm like, yeah, damn. So even though it's like, yeah, monarchy bad, I kind of like, I almost have like a feel bad sympathy for like monarchs through history, even the ones that go crazy or turn into tyrants. It's like, yeah, it's a tough break, bro. It's a tough job. You kind of see why there's almost like an aristocratic lineage, like a group of people who are hereditarily like trained to just be in that place. Ugh. Anyway, me defending the monarchy aside, let's keep plowing through, bros. Well, for this, around these emperors or tsars become such hereditary rights or by election, there are many specialists from among the ordinary three-brained beings in order that they may prompt them as to do what they must do and say in every circumstance, and these promptings and directions must be carried out in such a way that the strangers may not notice that the emperor or tsar manifests not from his own, but from others' initiatives. So over time, the Tsar or ruler almost kind of degenerates as well, and he's kind of ruled by an oligarchy behind him. The experts. And in order to remember all this, the Tsars must, of course, also practice. And what it means to practice, you can probably already picture to yourself after what I have just told you. I understood this with all my being when I prepared myself for my illustrious presentation. God, it sounds like everyone's a puppet string just working around a kind of a pageant, a weird play. During my existence on that planet, such a preparation, by the way, was necessary for me personally. Only once were such preparations necessary every day, and for every separate occasion, then may one be spared from experiencing such a merciless fate. I personally, at least, would not under any conditions be in the skin of such a terrestrial emperor or tsar. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be the ruler, bro. I would not want to be the ruler. And would neither wish it for my very worst enemy, nor the enemy of my nearest. After this unforgettable, supreme presentation of mine, I very soon left St. Petersburg for other parts of the continent of Europe, and began to have as the chief places of my existence various cities of the countries which were situated both on the same continent, Europe, as well as on other continents. I was again, later, many times, but for other affairs, in the same community, Russia, where during that period of the flow of time, their great possessors there of reciprocal destruction took place, and the destruction of everything already attained by them, which this time, as I have already told you, was called by them Bolshevism. You remember I promised to relate to you about the fundamental real causes of this arch-phenomenal process. Well, it is necessary to tell you that, okay, so this is interesting. This grievous phenomenon arises there thanks to two independent factors, the first of which is the cosmic law, Sulionensis, and the second is always the same abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence established by themselves. In order that you should better understand about these factors, I will explain to you about each of them separately, and we'll begin by the cosmic law, Sulionensis. So let's put a bookmark in this, boys. Finally getting to learn it. First of all, you must be told that all three-brained beings, on whatever planet may arise, and whatever exterior coating they may receive, always await the manifestations of the action of this law with impatience and with joy, somewhat how your favorites await what are called their feasts of Easter, Bayram, Zadik, Ramadan, Kayalana, and so on. So in the same way, we like anticipate Christmas. Christmas is coming! Woo! Oh, High Desert asks, if the crown is heavy, is the fool the optimal position? Yes. So That's interesting. So in other planets, three-brained beings, or other parts of the galaxy, or other parts of the cosmos, three-brained beings understand there is a cosmic law called Suliensius, and they wait for it. And they like wait for it like, oh my god, Christmas is coming. Oh, the law of Suliensius is going to actualize in my being. Ooh, that's how they feel about it. So it's a good thing, supposedly. The only difference is in this, that your favorites await these feasts of theirs with impatience, because on these holidays it has become customary among them to allow themselves to be more jolly and to booze freely, while the beings of the other planets await the action of Suliensius with impatience, because thanks to it, the need for evolving in the sense of acquiring of objective reason by them increases in them by itself. Okay, yeah. So the law of Suliensius basically increases their level of objective being reason by a notch or by a degree or something. It just happens automatically. And that also happens to us. So let's see. And it's also a reason for war. Huh? Okay. Okay. Let's see what he says. As regards the causes which bring forth this same action of this cosmic law, they are for each planet different, and always flow from and depend upon what is called the common cosmic harmonious movement. Moreover, frequently for your planet Earth, what is called the center of gravity of causes is the periodic tension of the sun of its system, which tension proceeds in its turn thanks to the influence upon this sun of a neighboring solar system which exists under the name of Beelzebub. So there's a cosmic chain of vibration happening here, harmonious movement, but nonetheless, the sun exerts some kind of condition which triggers a cosmic law in our planet. In this latter, okay, but he's talking about the chain. So on this other system, Beelzebub, in this system, however, such a center of gravity arises because the number of its concentrations there is a great comet, Solney, which according to certain known combinations of the common cosmic harmonious movement at times approaches on its falling very near to its sun, Beelzebub, which is forced by this to make a strong tension in order to maintain the path of its own falling. This tension provokes the tension of the suns of the neighboring system, among the number of which is the system Ours, and when the sun Ours strains itself not to change its path of falling inherent to it, this sun Ours in its turn provokes the same tension in all the concentrations of its own system, among which is also the planet Earth. So, okay, so there's kind of a celestial vibration of tensions, which you would say. That's interesting. What he says, uses the word tension. What does that make you think? It makes you think of a string, and what happens when you pluck a string. There's a kind of a cosmic music, a song playing along, and at different times we get to a chorus, and at a chorus or a crescendo, then a war happens. The tension in all the planets acts also on the common presences of all beings. Gravitational waves, asks Tyler. Gravitational or cosmic radiation. Gurdjieff uses the term cosmic radiation, so something like a combination of cosmic radiation, gravitational waves, and also something esoteric. You know, Gurdjieff is big on that. Like when he talks about like pranic breathing, he says, you know, they say there are 18 elements in the air, and science only knows 6, or something. It's like you breathe in, and when you breathe out, only the 6 remain within you. But there are techniques to when you breathe in and you breathe out another 6 substances that science doesn't know about is embedded in you. So it's kind of like something similar here. There's some kind of chain of cosmic radiation happening. Gravitational waves may be a part of it, you know, this and that. But there are things that our reductionist, empirical, mechanical science cannot perceive because it's working on a completely wrong framework, but that Gurdjieff has knowledge of, that he's received through either these traditions, straight from ancient Alcaldan society. Or as he points out in chapter 23, he talks about how there's like some kind of Akashic record function in the atmosphere of the Earth, and if you get to a certain degree of being reason, you can actually access it. So that's what he seems to be going on. Anyway, So the tension in all the planets acts also on the common presences of the beings arising and breeding on them. So always engendering in the beings, besides desires and intentions of which they are not aware, so it hits us in our subconscious, and our subconscious moves us. The feeling called sacred Iabuliunusar. Okay, I think I got that. Such a weird word. Or as your favorites would say, the feeling of religiousness. Namely, that being feeling, the feeling of the sublime, just hits us every now and then, which at times appears in the desire and striving for, as I have already said, speedier self-reflecting in the sense of objective reason. It is interesting that when this sacred feeling or another similar to it, which also engendered by a certain common cosmic actualization proceeds in the common presences of your favorites, then they accept it as a symptom of certain of their numerous diseases, and in the given case, for example, they call this feeling nerves. That's interesting. Roberto asks, why Trump? He's just the puppet that cosmic forces have placed in the way at the moment. Are you referencing my hat? It's just to gain attention, bro. I'm just trying to get attention. It is necessary to remark that such an impulse inherent in the presence of all three-brained beings of our great universe formerly arose and became actualized almost normally in the majority of terrestrial beings of that time, namely from the time of the removal of the organ Kundabuffer from the common presences of the three-brained beings of the planet Earth right up to the second transpalnean perturbation. But later, among the number of chief evils which flow from the conditions of ordinary being existence established by themselves, especially when in the presences of every terrestrial three-brained being, there began to become predominant the evil inner god of theirs, I mentioned, named their self-calming, that it occurred that in them, under the influence of this action, Suliunensius, I got it, instead of the desire and striving for a speedier self-perfection. So that's interesting. So on this planet, every now and then, cosmic forces hit the planet, which invoke within all people like a feeling like I need to self-perfect myself. I need to, I'm striving for something more, and it should be a religious, like a mystical, spiritual feeling. But there's the remnants of the Kundabuffer organ in us dulls that feeling, and most people actually don't feel it. It pacifies it. As Kundabuffer buffer, it buffers it, so we don't feel it. Like, on a train, the little stopper buffer, so you don't feel the train shaking as it moves along. You're just kind of just going along. It's like it buffers you against the shocks, the exterior shocks of cosmic rays that want to try and make you try to develop your being. Very interesting. Hi, Desert asks, was Alexander the sun god? Was his power level equal or greater than planets, even equal to the sun? Alexander the Great was just a dude, bruh. Gurdjieff doesn't seem as very high, but I have some respect for him. He was a very interesting leader. Very powerful leader. I have that respect for him. He was a genius that happened to choose the martial path, and he did a lot of did a lot of stuff. He may have had some problems, but he also had some very powerful attributes. But did he reach a higher being level? Gurdjieff doesn't think so. He just kind of thinks he reached a level of Hannes Musen. But nonetheless, that's still something, I guess. He had some kind of objective being reason. Which is why people, Gurdjieff doesn't like him, but hey, Nietzsche likes Alexander. Nietzsche likes Alexander, Napoleon, Caesar, all those guys. He models his Übermensch after them. So, there's something in Alexander. I'm not sure if it's like he is the sun god, but it's something in Alexander that's like, Paracelsus talks about planetary forces working with them, like in an act of celestial magic. And it's like, you work with Jupiter, for some kind of wisdom, you work with Mercury for better communication, but also, for a silver tongue. You work with Mars to help strengthen you, and so you can kind of power through things. Venus for relationships, and it makes you kind of more refined. You can do art better, endows you with the skill of art and poetry. But he says every now and then, the planets, instead of being invoked, the planets will just adopt a child. And he says it just happens. And he says every now and then, like Jupiter will just adopt someone and they will become a great civil worker. Or Saturn will adopt someone and they will become a philosopher of the time. And it's like they don't even have a necessarily esoteric outlook on life. It's just that planet has adopted them and just imbue, almost like it's an incarnation of the planet itself. So when you see leaders like that, it's almost like, I would say, from a Paracelsian perspective, it's almost like they themselves may not have been esoteric, but they themselves may not have done a work consciously on themselves. He was interested in esoteric things. There was some sort of developed there, but it's almost like the sun adopted them and just filled them with a bunch of force, and they did a kind of a huge kind of thing. And then, but it's just an adoption. If it's not conscious, if you don't follow it through, eventually it dissipates. Napoleon talks about his guiding star, and then his star leaves him at a certain point and he just it dissipates. Surely Macron didn't rule as Jupiter. Oh God. And some people maybe wish it. I mean, hey, maybe they do some ceremonial magic to try and increase it, but people of nowadays are so degenerate. It's like, you try to imbue yourself with energies and it just, I don't know, gets absorbed into your buffer system, and it doesn't kind of go to the correct place. We're not a kind of a correct system. That's the whole thing of Gurdjieff saying you need to get balanced. Because if you have a dysfunctional system and you put energy in, it just becomes more dysfunctional. It doesn't really work. Anyway, we're going off topic. Let's keep plowing through. I think we're just going to get up to something interesting as well. So the action of Sulianus, instead of the desire for striving for a speedier self-perfection, something began to arise as they themselves characterized by the words need of freedom. That's interesting. So instead of self-perfecting, it's like, I need freedoms. I need rights. You need to not intrude on my rights. That's actually, that impulse that you see in people should actually be an inverted feeling of, I need to perfect myself, I need to get better, but instead it's an external, like, give me my freedoms, give me my rights. That's very interesting. I wonder what Jordan Peterson would think of Gurdjieff. Which chiefly serves the cause of the arising there of these same grievous processes of they're similar to the last Bolshevism. So basically, I guess what happens is the Sulianus ray, the cosmic rays, the tension arise. Instead of striking people and creating that sensation, that spiritual, mystical, I need to seek initiation, I need to, become a higher being. It's, I need freedom, I need my rights. And what happens, a Hannes Musen will come along and will create an ism, communism, nationalism, and it'll be like, hey, I can give you those rights. And then a war happens and ruins everything. Thank you so much, Tyler. Halfway mark. Okay, we're getting ready. We're there. We're almost there. Let's go. We're killing it, guys. We need to just keep plowing through. We're halfway mark, and we're 2 hours in. Let's keep going. I will explain to you somewhat later how they represent, to themselves this famous freedom of theirs. And now I will only tell you that feeling which arises from the action of Sulianensius strengthens in them the need for some or other general change in the conditions of their ordinary external being existence, which until then were more or less stable. Very interesting. It's so interesting, these little observations, because it's not just a psychology that's internal and it's like psychoanalysis and it's the subconscious manipulating us, but there's also cosmic forces manipulating us. But it's also not just astrology and it's all this and you just look at the stars and this is what happens. It's like he's doing both. He has the inner phenomenological subconscious manipulations that kind of rule us, but then also he's talking about cosmic forces. He's talking about both sides like manipulating us, and we're this thing caught in between cosmic and terrestrial and chthonic subterranean psychological forces. It's so interesting. Anyway, after the second Transpalnean perturbation, so basically this is the fall of Atlantis, by the way, everyone. to this ill-starred planet of yours that is after the loss of Atlantis. So Transpalnean perturbation is the, the earthquake, or the tremors in the crust of the earth, which caused the huge flood which destroyed Atlantis. Whenever you see that, it's the Atlantis thing. The loss of Atlantis, the action of the cosmic law Suliensius in the general presences of these favorites of yours was actualized at least 40 times. And almost from the very beginning, each time, thanks already to this strange need for freedom, which has since been fixed in the majority of them, almost the same proceeded as in recent years, still proceeded on the part of the surface of your planet, on which the totality of the existing groups is called Russia. Oh, that's interesting. Wait, hold up. Yeah, okay, so he's talking about the communist revolution, yeah. Here it is extremely important also to note that the existence itself of these terrifying processes could not in any way take place there among the three-brained beings of the planet Earth if those data which had remained intact in their subconsciousness for the engendering of the being impulse conscience, to which data the most saintly Ashiata was the first to turn his attention upon, which he relied for the fulfillment of his mission, had taken part in the functioning of that consciousness of theirs, which has become habitual for them during their waking state. Okay, oof, that was a sentence. So it's the extremely important thing to note is basically the process couldn't have arisen in them if that conscience within our subconsciousness wasn't there as well. So it's actually interesting in that paragraph there, which was a bit bloated, he's saying the way out of it, how do we make sure we're not being manipulated then? It's the work of the Ashiata Shaimash, which was to turn inwards to retrieve from our subconsciousness the conscience. There are being impulses within us that have been warped, but one of them, the conscience, the being impulse of conscience, has survived without being warped. It's still pure, and it's survived by descending into our subconsciousness. So it's a part of us that we're unaware of. So by becoming aware of it, connecting with it, really having that still small voice come back and guide us, that is a thing that then we can use that as a thing to receive those proper being impulses. Then it's interesting. Plotinus has something where it's like there's a guardian angel, there's an angel within, like the heavens, and it has a thread that reaches down and into your heart, and it plucks that thread, and that's how it communes with you. And this kind of goes back to the ideas of the nous atom in Dayspring of Youth, or conversation with the holy guardian angel or the higher genius. It's like almost like the conscience that you struggle to pull out of your subconscious and connect with. This is connected in some way to the obtaining of the functioning of the higher functions, the higher cylinders that Gurdjieff talks about. So we need to balance ourselves. We need to become the balanced man, have our cylinders in order, our life in order. And then, through this self-observation, through self-remembering, through sitting practice, through self-reflection as well, there's this retrospection exercise which gets talked about all through this, or Beelzebub's tales. We are able to pull out this conscience, this voice, and almost like another part of ourself, which Gurdjieff says, if you obtain higher functioning, it's so odd for some people, they see it as something external to themselves, hence why you get in like Rosicrucian schools, the holy guardian angel communications, it's supposed to be you, but it's, it's extrapolated as another being. So there's all these little things that are kind of connecting and falling into place here. So to get past this, we need to get to that conscience. Anyway, I just rambled there for a little bit, let's keep going. Only in consequence of the fact that the data for the sacred impulse of being conscience do not take part in the function of this consciousness of theirs, the actions of the law I pronounce this so many times. Come on. Take a shot, everyone. Soliunensius. There we go. Just as well as of other inevitable cosmic laws, are molded into such abnormal and for themselves pitiable forms. Although the whole totality of causes serves as the sources for the arising of the second factor, Yet, in my opinion, the basic cause also in the given case is nevertheless this fact that the famous subdivision into castes becomes established among them regarding their mutual relationship among themselves, which subdivision has constantly existed there, with the exception only of that period when there was definitely rooted among them the results of the most saintly labors of Ashiata Shamash. So the caste system dissolved with Ashiata Shamash. That's interesting. Because of the work. So it's like the caste system is almost something that will inevitably continuously return. And its breaking can only break if we all, as a humanity, are able to recover the conscience. Interesting. The difference is only in this, that in former centuries, the division into different castes proceeded from the consciousness and intention of several separate individuals there, while now this proceeds quite automatically without the participation of anyone's will or anyone's consciousness. Now, my boy. Yeah, so the whole thing is in Atlantis they had castes, but there was like the priest caste had like clairvoyance and could see a baby, you know, when it was born, what caste it would be suitable for. Nowadays, that's not how castes work now. Now it's like, you know, you're the son of a carpenter, you're going to be a carpenter, because your father was a carpenter, and his father, you're just like your father. You know, that's how it works. It's like, oh, you're a policeman, your father was a policeman, your father was a lawyer, your father was a doctor. We kind of fall into these patterns in that way. I'm getting more love hearts and chats, boys. Now, my boy, we've got another my boy. I find it opportune to explain to you a little about this, namely, in what way and in what gradations these favorites of yours became automatically sorted out from their different celebrated castes, and how they later already began to subdivide themselves into these castes. Socioeconomic castes, this style exactly. When according to various chance circumstances and wherever significant groups of them became concentrated and they exist together, then several of them, in whom firstly some reason or other the consequences of the property of the organ Kundabuffer had been previously well crystallized, the totality of which crystallizations in general gives to their common presences the impulses for what is called cunning. And secondly, in whose hands at the given time there appear for some reason or other many different what are called terrifying means, or what they themselves call weapons, quickly set themselves apart from other beings, and putting themselves at their head constitute the beginnings of what are called the ruling class. So it's always the bro acting like Kratos with all these boys. Is another guy? Yeah, I guess that was at the weapons. It's always the chads with the weapons that take the ruling position. And further, since in all the three-brained beings of the planet Earth, and particularly of recent periods, the sacred being impulse called conscience does not take part in the functioning of their general consciousness, in consequence of which, in them there is absent every need for making any conscious being effort at all. Then they, that is, the beings who had set themselves apart and who had assigned themselves to the ruling class, profiting by the said terrifying means, compel other beings. I'm getting like an arm cramp here, Jesus. Compel other beings of the given groupings to produce for them even those efforts which every being should inevitably actualize in ordinary being existence. And other beings of these groupings, also not wishing for the same reasons personally to produce these being efforts, do not even for others at the same time, being afraid of the mentioned terrifying means of the beings of the ruling class, begin to have recourse to all kinds of cunning in order, as it is said there, to load on one another's backs such being efforts as are inevitably required for the beings of the ruling class. As a result, the beings of every such grouping usually sort themselves out gradually and fall into diverse categories according to the degree of their skill and their artfulness. And so, from the division of the beings into categories of these kind, there just begins in the following generations a subdivision and an assigning of each other into these famous castes of theirs. From this assigning of each of other into castes of diverse kinds, there is already by itself infallibly crystallized in the common presences of each of them in relation to the beings who belong to other castes, that being data which is called hate, just that data which was never in any other being in the whole of our great universe, and which in its turn engenders in the common presence of every one those impulses shameful for the three-brained beings which they themselves call envy, jealousy, adultery, and many other similar impulses. Gurdjieff melted, and yet melted a lot of fragiles mindes, says Nauscrafts. Yes? Question mark? And so, my boy, we got enough. Oof, I needed that, and so, my boy. These terrifying processes of reciprocal destruction, and of the destruction of everything already attained by them there, proceed partly from this, that in those periods when, in their common presences, the action of the cosmic law Sulionensius becomes evident, besides the already mentioned need for freedom in them, on the one hand, the intensity of the action of the data for engendering constantly the impulse of timidity before power possessors automatically diminishes, which data has already become inherent in their common presences, and on the other hand, the intensity of the action of that said strange being data increases, which data provokes hate in the given case in relation to the beings who belong to other castes. That is why I said that this subdivision of theirs into castes, which bring about the totality of the results of these unique strange being data, which always increase in their functionings, and which flow, as you may have already, from all that I have told you, doubtless been convinced also from the conditions of their abnormal ordinary being existence, just serves chiefly as the second factor for the arising of these terrifying processes. These terrible processes usually arise and flow in the following sequence. It always begins with this, that several beings from one or other grouping, namely those in whom, for some reason or other, there were previously crystallized data stronger than in other beings, which data engender the mentioned strange impulses in relation to the beings who belong to other castes, particularly to the beings who belong to the caste of the ruling class. Seeing and feeling reality more than others under the influence of the action of Suliensius, they begin, as is said, there to clamor, and these clamoring orators become in relation to those around them, such as are at the present time there, usually called leaders. So that's interesting. So you bifurcate into classes. There's different classes or castes of people, and everyone more or less lacks. Maybe I need this so bad. Oh, cool drinking fruits. So the bifurcation of classes happens, castes, but then, because of degeneration, because of all of that, because of the consequence of the Kundabata organ, you don't see reality properly. Being data doesn't crystallize naturally. Objective being data doesn't crystallize naturally. So what happens then? What happens is, it's almost like the higher classes, because they, more free time, more leisure, more degeneration, they get less objective being data in them than someone somewhere in the lower class, whether it's warrior or, a philosopher, a random uni student. And even though that person is still unconscious, because they have more objective being data, when the Suliensius, ray happens and it strikes them, it's like they experience it more vividly than others, but once again, it's not spiritualized because they're unconscious. So they just experience it as like a need for freedom, and they begin to rally against the establishment. That's so interesting. Oh my god, this is so good. It's mukbang time, boys. So, and further, thanks on the one hand to this clamor, and on the other hand, thanks to the action of always the same cosmic law, Suli. Why is this word so hard? Soliunensius. Man, those of you who are taking shots must be like completely plastered now. Which action is always combined abnormally in the presences of all of them. Others also begin to clamor. When these clamorers among the ordinary beings begin already excessively, cacophonically, to act upon what are called the effeminate nerves of the left half. That's funny. Of several of the power-possessing beings of the given community. And these latter order those whose job it is to grease with what is called Scottish cream. Bro, is this I want to know, what is this? What is this? Give me the Scottish cream reference. I've never heard this. Oh. Of course. That does look delicious. So there is actually Scottish cream, but I think this is the reference. Yeah. Mm. So they getting Scottish creamed, baby. The navels of several particularly loud clamorers. Then there begin these excesses of theirs, which progressively increasing reach their zenith, yet to their misfortune ultimately always leads to nothing, you know. R.I.P. The proletariat uprising. Oh, that's good stuff. So, these processes of theirs, if they had even a little improved the existence of beings of subsequent generations, then perhaps, from the point of view of a strictly impartial observer, they might even not have appeared to be so terrifying. Yet to the misfortune of all three-brained beings of our great universe, the calamity is just in this, that as soon as the blissful action of this cosmic lawful manifestation ceases, and these terrifying processes come to an end, then there again begins the old story, and their ordinary being existence becomes more bitter than before. And parallel with this, there also deteriorates what is called their sane awareness of the sense and aim of their existence. Yeah. This latter deteriorates, in my opinion, chiefly because after these processes, the leading beings of the former ruling class are usually replaced by beings who proceed from other different castes, and who perform this last process did not have in the persons of their representatives, either of the present or past generations, anything in common, either consciously or unconsciously, with the being manifestation, in which is included the ability to lead the outer, and now, and then even the inner processes of the being existence of surrounding beings who, although similar to them, yet in the sense of reason had not yet attained their degree. Oof. Dylan's in the chat. Irish cream pie potato? Many baby, I exist because there is, retard of spiritual, shall inherit the universe. We are all the sons and daughters of schizophrenics. Could not be diagnosed, and we shall inherit the earth. Thank you, Dylan, for the $5. Justice demands it be admitted that although in the common presences of the three-brained beings, there of the ruling class, the data present in their subconsciousness for the engendering of real being conscience also did not take part in the functioning of their what is called waking consciousness yet. At least they usually have the habit of ruling, acquired by hereditary, and improving automatically from generation to generation. Okay, so wait, there is improvement? So we need this ruling class who's genetically, by hereditary, adapted to ruling. So Tyler asked something interesting. He said, how often does Sulionensis occur? What periodicity do you think? Hundreds of years? So it's interesting. He mentioned from something like from the fall of Atlantis, there's been 40, which is what, 10,000 years? But he says the trigger of it is what? He says, you know, this vibration, the tensing of the planet happens because of our sun, and it happens from our sun because of another sun, and it happened that other sun has that tension happening because of a comet that flies around it and changes slightly the law of its falling, so the tension is there because it tries to keep its place. So if it's some heavenly body in another system, and via a chain of events then affects us. So that's why perhaps it has happened only 40 times in the last 10,000 years. So who knows when the next one is going to happen? But via his implications, he's saying that it happened to the Bolsheviks. That was what the Bolshevik Revolution is, or was in Russia. So, yeah. Maybe it's more often. Maybe it's 100 years or something. Let's keep going. In the presences of beings who have newly attained to power, not only is real being conscience absent, as it was also absent in the beings of the former ruling class, but further in them, in addition, those charms, which began particularly, stormily to manifest, and give extraordinary, terrifying results, which charms are crystallized in general in the presences of terrestrial three-brained beings, especially of recent times, and consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, such as vanity, pride, self-conceit, self-love, and others, which as they had as yet hardly ever been satisfied to a sufficient degree, are in them in their functionings particularly new. So that's, yeah, not only you throw out the ruling class, and not only, you know, they're not conscious, they're not doing their job well, but then you replace them, that person also isn't truly conscious and doesn't even have the hereditary backing. Tyler asks about 250 years by that math. Oh, so that's the 10K divided by 40. But this is the other thing. That's why I mentioned it was this, not just the sun, but a sun hitting the sun, which is done by a little comet. By dividing 40 by, 10K, and getting 250 years, that's assuming that it's an equal 250 years between each event. It could be, you know, because there's this thing, it could happen not every two, you know, it could happen in a staggered way. Like it could happen 100 years later, and then like it could take 1,000 years after that. It could happen then once every 500 years, and then it could just happen like for 8 times in a row, like for each 50 years or something. Because it's all to do not with our sun and our planet, but it's like a comet around another sun. So there's that to kind of contend with. Welcome everyone who's joining for the mukbang. Oh. This is so good. When you like talk for like 2 hours straight and then you just eat like cool fruit, it's like the best thing ever. Oh, just need to get some being food into me. So good. Okay. To these terrestrial beings who become impromptu power possessing, and who have not any hereditary data at all in themselves. So someone who was born a ruler, instinctually there should be something there, but these people don't even have the instincts of a ruler. One of the sayings of our dear teacher can well be applied, which he expresses in the following words. He doesn't say Mullah Nasruddin. This is interesting. I never yet met that idiot who, accustomed to shuffle in a pair of old shoes, would feel comfortable in smart new ones. I'm curious, is this an actual quote from someone in history? Because he didn't name Mullah Nasruddin. He just said our teacher. Red Dwarf? Bruh. Where did Red Dwarf get it from? Yeah. Nah, Google's just messing with me. And I just found the closest thing is not Red Dwarf. Not Red Dwarf at all. Bruh, don't care. I bet you anything that's like a real quote from some literature somewhere. I wonder if it's like... Yeah, I know, right? I wonder if it's like... Because it's the chapter of Russia, if this is like a Dostoevsky or a Tolstoy quote or something, or Pushkin or something. I don't know. Anyway. And really, my boy. We got another my boy. When each time on the planet Earth, the action of Suli... Ketchup, stop! Soliunensius, yes, I got it, ceases, and their relatively normal existence, already somehow established again, begins among your favorites, then the newly baked power-possessing beings usually cut those capers, thanks to which the birth rate of what are called slugs, snails, lice, moles, crickets, and many other similar parasites who destroy everything good each time, they always increase more and more on that planet. Now it's craft ice. Why is it a cult? Why not clear? It's, yeah, basically he's doing this to make us pay attention. There always needs to be a price for occult knowledge. And if we're not paying the teacher, then we pay with our time. We pay with effort. And what is it? Kadirza asks, what's Red Dwarf? Red Dwarf is like a British TV show? From like, when? I can't even remember, man. Yeah, and it was a sci-fi comedy. So it was like some guy gets frozen on a spaceship and he wakes up years later and everyone's dead. And except one dude who's a hologram, and then another dude was like a cat. Like some cats were on the ship and they bred and evolved into another like human. So it's like a human guy called Cat, a hologram, and then this dude, and they go on, and then it's basically a sitcom on a spaceship. That's the Red Dwarf plot. And yes, if you're into British comedy, it is as good as I made that sound. And if you hate British comedy, it is as worse and as bad as I made it sound. Anyway, Red Dwarf aside, let's go. As I have begun to speak about Bolshevism, then I will relate to you here on this subject in order yet once again to give you an example of one peculiarity of the being existence of your favorites, which had already become fully proper to them, about one of their naive arguments which is not without its humor. This naivety of theirs, which may arise through an already excessively wretched logical confrontation being rumination, consists in this, that although all events there, without exception in the sense of mutual relationships among themselves, proceeded during the last 2 centuries exclusively already by themselves without any participation of the consciousness or intention of whomever it may be of the contemporary beings, they nevertheless always ascribe with certainty, and even with jealousy, all the results, good as well as bad, flowing from these events to one another, one or other among them, similar to themselves. And such an abnormality, which had become fixed in the totality of their spiritualized parts, resulted from the following causes. First of all, from their common presences, there gradually totally disappeared all those being data, the totality of which in general is capable of engendering in the presences of beings a property called presentiment of the future. In consequence of this, they are entirely deprived of the possibility in any degree whatever of foreseeing imminent events. Secondly, having a narrow, what is called horizon, and a short memory, they not only know nothing about long past events on their planets, but even do not remember about that which preceded quite recently, almost even yesterday. And thirdly, these cosmic laws are unknown to them, thanks to which there chiefly arise those sorrowful events which proceed amongst these same contemporary favorites of yours are sure in all their presences that this terrifying process, which they call Bolshevism, proceeded for the first time on their planet, and that nothing like this already darling civilization of theirs had ever existed previous to them. So basically Bolshevism is a recurrence that's happened multiple times again and again. Oh, Tyler in the chat. System that might generate Sulianus is Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, Rigil Centaurus. Ptolemy. Yes. Possibly. Dylan says, dwarfs come from the inner earth, Agatha. And shit, they get ready if they blush. Red dwarf. Thank you, Dylan. Dylan tried. For the first, yeah. So, Bolshevism is a recurrence that happens again and again. Rich River King says, Tyler, probably the Pole Star Assault's twin. Possibly, yeah. Yeah, that's also very interesting. They are even sure that this has happened thanks only to the evolution of the gradually progressing reason of the beings similar to themselves. Yeah, it's only because of we've been progressing. So Gurdjieff is very against progressive ideology in the sense that not the ideology, it's the literally philosophical groundwork of it. He's just like, no, you're dumb. You think you've achieved progress? You haven't achieved progress. This has happened before. But your timeline and your memory of the events and your civilization is just wrecked, so you don't even have the memory of it. And you genuinely think it's because of you've progressed in reason? You haven't even done that. So their confrontative argument on the subject of similar processes, which had taken place many times in the past on their planet, may serve as a very good example for the illustration and characterization of the phenomenal dullness and bluntness of that being rumination which they have. According to the common sense of every three-brained being, similar processes had to proceed, and since I became interested in the strange psyche of these favorites of yours, and occupied myself with every aspect of the observation of them, I myself have been a witness, as I have said, no less than 40 times of exactly similar processes, which I would call the process up to the destruction of everything within sight. Okay, 40 times, and he mentions the Sulianus vibration hitting us 40 times, so communism has never been tried. According to Gurdjieff, it's been tried 40 times in the last 10,000 years. And each time it happens, it destroys the memory of the previous time. That's very interesting. It is interesting to is now concentrated. They proceeded on that part of the surface of their planet which they named Egypt. Those terrified on this same Egypt so often in consequence of the fact that this part of the surface of your planet during the found itself in relation to the common cosmic harmonious movement in the position of what is called the center of gravity of radiations. And that is why the influence of the cosmic law Soliunensius, let's go with it, often acted on the presence of the three-brained beings breeding there, and often brought forth in them such an abnormality. Ooh. A parallel comparison of the real data concerning the events which took place on the same Egypt, and those data about them which became fixed in the being representation and understanding of almost every responsible being of famous contemporary culture, and which are now known to them, as it were, thanks to their already perfect reason, might serve as an obvious illustrative example of from what general data their logical mentation at the period of their responsible existence is built up and consists. And likewise, give me the possibility, yet once again, to notice and emphasize to you all the maleficence in an objective sense of their usage, which was finally fixed in the process of their ordinary existence, and which they themselves call by the high-sounding words education and schooling of the growing generation. The point is that it's interesting you mentioned Egypt there, like communism happened in Egypt. Maybe that was the Sea Peoples. It was actually a communist uprising. The point is that among the number of all possible kinds of ephemeral, fantastic informations, from the totality of which, as a result, their strange reason proper to them alone is formed there is likewise the history of this same Egypt. Dylan in the chat says, and he donates 5. Thank you, Dylan. Bolshevism leads to empty bowls and vehicular maleficence. Also, I am preparing a chariot of iron and fire. How do I make it maximum power? Transmute that vril, Dylan. Transmute the vril. This, evidently thought out by some or other candidate for Hasnamus, individuals among them, was even made for them what is called an obligatory subject in an educational establishment, in all educational establishments in which this history, among other stupidities, is strongly hammered into their separate concentrations for the functioning of spiritual perceptions and manifestations. That is, into what they themselves would call the brains of these unfortunate future responsible beings. So it's interesting. He says the communists alter history, and this, damages all chances of the future. And further, when they become such, these fantastic informations learned by them, parrot-like by compulsion, serve them as material for being associations and logical confrontative meditation. Yeah, you learn the Hegelian dialectic and false history. Should I ride the tiger or slay the dragon? Asks Out Tuition. Ooh. I mean, you gotta do both. Riding the tiger is the external thing. Slaying the dragon is the internal thing. The essence of riding the tiger is you treat the world you live in, or the society. We live in a society. The culture you live in, like how an ancient Greek would if he was living amongst barbarians. You would live, according to morals, according to laws. You would keep, certain strict things, but you wouldn't fall into the vices of those people. You always still see yourself as a foreigner in a foreign country. So you keep your virtue, your integrity to yourself, even while you're in, the land of barbarians. It's like you have to kind of ride the tiger through, history, through the times that you're in. But slay the dragon, that's internal. You slay the dragon within yourself. You got to do both. You got to do both in the Kali Yuga. Ride the tiger into the battle with the dragon, basically. Basically, that's what's up. But the tiger is external, the dragon is internal. That is why, my boy, at the present time, there on that ill-fated planet, every being who has already reached responsible age instead of the real knowledge which every normal three-brained being should have concerning the events which took place on that planet in the past, knows about everything in the same way in which, as in the present case, he ruminates with his being reason, and unconsciously becomes aware, with all his being, about this same Egypt. There's no gainsaying it. Each one of the already, according to them, responsible three-brained beings of this strange planet already knows, thanks to their system of education and schooling, the history of beings who existed in the past of Egypt. Yet how, thanks to the said means of perception of information which they themselves call learning parrot-like, he knows this, and what totality of the being representation about this results from all three of his spiritualized being parts, you may picture to yourself with your own eyes, and clearly understand from the following illustration of mine. Almost every one of them knows that among ancient Egyptians there were 24 dynasties. But if any one of them is asked, why are there so many dynasties among them, it would then appear that he had never even thought about it. Further, if one continues to insist on an answer, then this same being, who up to now knew and was sure with all his being that there were 24 dynasties among the ancient Egypts, he at best, of course, on the condition of one, helps him to be able to be sincere and to express aloud associations flowing in his mentation, reveals his logical mentation in some such way. I feel like we're getting to Graham Hancock territory, railing against the educators. But why? But what? Why? And then people get angry that you ask why. Among the Egyptians, there were 24 dynasties. Well, this proves that among the Egyptians there existed a monarchical state organization, and that the position of the king passed by inheritance from father to son. And as it was customary that the kings of one generation should have the same family name, and that all the kings who had this name composed one dynasty, then therefore they had as many different dynasties of kings as there were family names. Very understandable and clear, as the patch on the baggy trousers of the Honorable Mullah Nasr ad-Din. And if any of the beings of contemporary culture infallibly desire, and will continue to pant in order to explain well to his reason why among these ancient Egyptians the family name of their kings changed so often, then again, at the very best, his being mentation will associate approximately in the following sentence. He will say, exactly, this does prove nothing. This is what he's pointing out. He's just pointing out how people mentate. Evidently, in olden times in this Egypt, it often happens that the kings, or as they are named there, pharaohs, grew tired of reigning and abdicated their power, and this abdication in all probability proceeded in the following way, and approximately under the following circumstances. Let us suppose that some pharaoh or other named John Jeffrey lived peacefully and with full satisfaction and ruled over all the Egyptians. Well, once this same king or pharaoh, John Jeffrey, felt a very great weariness from his reigning of his, and one sleepless night, having pondered over his kingly position, first of all constated, and realized that all his being, that wish it or not, one grows tired of reigning, and that this occupation in general is an extremely trying job, and could not be said to be, for his personal felicity, either useful or safe. The pharaoh, John Jeffrey, became impressed with this realization, and profiting by the experience of his existence in the past, decided to try and find out how to prevail upon somebody or other, so that this other might deliver him from the said for him undesirable weariness. To this end, oh Johnny the Pharaoh indeed, to this end he probably invited some or other still ordinary John Jeffrey to come to him, and in a very polite way spoke to him roughly as follows. My highly honorable, incomparably kind John Jeffrey, I frankly confess to you, this is just like a comedy that Gurdjieff is laying out for us. As to my only friends and subjects worthy of my trust, that this kingdom over which I rule has already grown too wearisome for me, and this has happened because I am already extremely tired. As regards my dear son and heir, to whom I might now hand over the kingdom, he, speaking between ourselves, is, in spite of this very strong and healthy appearance, in fact, neither one nor the other. You, as a father known for his love for his posterity, will surely understand if I tell you that I very much love my son and heir, and that I would not like him to reign and get tired as I have, wherefore I have just decided to propose to you as a faithful subject and personal friend to deliver me and my son from reigning, and to take this high obligation upon myself, Lamau. And since evidently this still ordinary John Geoffrey was firstly and is said there a good sport, this is like, what he's pointing out is the naivety of this thinking. It's like, yeah, I'll go off on a massive tangent if I keep talking about this. We're almost 3 hours in, I gotta just keep plowing. And secondly, being a rascal who had much vanity, he with tears in his eyes shrugged his shoulders. If I must be lost, then let me be lost. Consented, and from the very next day began to reign. What a little rascal! What a wacky guy! As the family name of this second John Geoffrey was different, therefore on the next day the number of Egyptian dynasties was increased by yet one more. And so, as many pharaohs of this Egypt often grew tired, and loving their sons did not desire the same for them, renounced their kingdoms in this way to others, and hence so many dynasties piled up there. In reality, however, the change of dynasty in Egypt did not proceed so simply, and in the intervals between two dynasties there proceeded such perturbations, in comparison with which this contemporary Bolshevism is merely child's play. Wow. So Gurdjieff says, basically in between dynasties there were these huge uprisings. So maybe you could count the uprisings in between the dynasties, and that's like, gives you a kind of a rough view for the Suliensius vibrations. In the heat of this contemporary Bolshevism, I happened several times to be an eyewitness of the sincere indignation of several of those who, for some reasons, of course, personally independent of them, did not happen to take part in this same process, and who could, therefore, half-consciously observe from the outside, and with all their presences grow sincerely indignant at the actions of the individual beings similar to themselves, who were active persons in this terrifying process, namely, at the action of those individuals similar to them, whom on this occasion they called, and still up to now call, Bolsheviks, or comrades. In my opinion, it will do no harm here, apropos, to tell you that being experiencing of theirs, which is excellently characterized by the words, vainly to grow sincerely indignant. Hey, Necromonger finally caught live reading. I'm so happy. Yeah, we got a long one here today, so buckle up. Although we're coming to the end of it. So, also appears to be one of the unfortunate particularities of the psyche of these ill-fated three-brained beings who please you, especially the contemporary ones. Thanks only to this psychic abnormality, there gradually became one deranged in their common presences, many functionings both of their planetary body, already deranged without this, and of their body Kesdjan. Of course, this secondary being body is already coated in them, and has attained to the required what is called individuality. And such an abnormality of their psyche, namely, vainly to grow indignant, or as they themselves say, vainly to grow agitated, also flows from this, that from their common presences there has already long since disappeared the being horizon proper to be present in the three-brained beings, as well as the instinctive sensing of reality in its real light. So they no longer even see reality. Just their fantasy of the revolution. No. On account of the absence in their psyche of these two particularities, they could not even approximately suspect that individuals similar to themselves were in no way the cause of these terrifying processes there, and that these processes of their ill-fated planet proceeded from two inevitable great causes. The first of these causes is just the cosmic law, Suliensius, entirely independent of them, and the second cause, partly dependent on them, consists in this, that thanks to the totality of all the results of the abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence established by themselves, which still continued to be crystallized in their common presences, the data for bringing forth the sacred impulse conscience, do not in general take part in any of them, in the functioning of their ordinary waking state, in consequence of which the action of the first cause takes just this terrible form. This is interesting. So they crystallize Kesgen bodies, but they don't get conscience. That's something that's interesting. Because crystallization of Kesgen bodies, to me, that's something that requires consciousness as well, that you need to be awake. But there seems to be some kind of automatic thing or some kind of development that even communists go through, and you can have, I don't know, communists with Kesgen bodies, and that's how they become Hasnamusans. They, as I have already said, could not even approximately consider and understand that during these common planetary terrifying processes, individual persons are in no way the cause. Or maybe they already have Kesgen bodies from like previous lives or something? Anyway, the cause, and only by chance to be in those posts, the occupation of which on account of the conditions of mutual existence, which had already been established, compels them to manifest themselves in one or other role, the results of which roles, according to law conformity, entirely independent of themselves, are cast into these or other forms. Alrighty. Whew. In the heat of this last process of theirs, namely during this Russian Bolshevism, the contemporary beings of other communities grew very sincerely agitated when the beings who by chance had become, as it were, active in this distressing process, gave orders to the ordinary beings, as it is said, to shoot any Tom, Dick, or Harry. For the clarity of my further explanation concerning these terrifying processes of your unfortunate favorites, you must be further told about this, that this last process proceeded until today, continues to proceed on a large area of the surface of this ill-fated planet, and that during recent times these favorites of yours have very greatly increased in quantity. If, therefore, we compare the quantity of the contemporary three-brained beings who have been destroyed during this last process with those destroyed in the previous process, then this last process will indeed seem child's play. So he's basically saying, you know, the Bolshevik Revolution and all of the horrific stuff that's happened. If you could only compare that to the stuff that happened in the past, you would, oof. In order that you may better understand this and compare those former processes with the contemporary Bolshevism, I will now give you a couple of little scenes from former history. Let us say the Egypt I have already mentioned. When in one of the intervals, my brain is going fuzzy. Guys, I am not gonna lie. Just a second, 7:42, how longer do we gotta go? Oh, we've got another hour at least, god damn it. Oh my god. Oh god, oh. Okay, wait, we're at like 7:42, right? Okay, we got 20 more pages on my PDF. Let's go. Perhaps they rely on collective unconscious spawning, a pseudo hive-minded simulacrum of one, possibly. I'm here for Egypt, says Ghoul. Let's go, guys. Let's plow through. We've got an hour left. Let's do this. When in one of the intervals between the dynasties of these Egyptian pharaohs or kings, there proceeded in Egypt a process such as this contemporary Bolshevism, the chief committee of the revolutionaries announced to all the population that, among other things, that elections would soon begin for the chiefs of the large and small points of theirs, or as they say, towns and villages, and that these elections would proceed on the following principles. Those were to be elected as chiefs for the towns and villages who would put in their sacred vessels more of what are called krohans than other. Kroan was the name given then in Egypt to sacrificial offerings. Okay, I'm just gonna keep reading. The point is that according to what is called the religion of the beings of this country, it was the custom, among others, during religious ceremonies which proceeded in special places, to put before each ordinary being who went to these ceremonies special clay vessels, so that each ordinary being there had to put into these sacred vessels each time, after the utterance of certain prayers, vegetables or fruits specially designated for the given day. Well, these worthy things for offering as sacrifice were then called krohans. In all probability, this manipulation was devised by the theocrats of that time as a profitable item for the welfare of their, as they are called, sycophants. In that decree about which I have just told you, it was stated that on the occasion, krohans had to consist of the eyes of outcasts, by which word the ordinary three-brained beings. They're called those beings behind their backs who belong to the caste of the ruling class, by which name then all the beings of this caste wholesale were called, without excluding the beings of the passive half, children or old folk. Ooh. Furthermore, they're basically gonna cut out the eyes of women and children of the higher class and put them on the sacrificial altars. Ooh. Further, in this announcement, it was stated that he who would have on the day of the elections the most krohans in his sacred vessel would be appointed as chief of the whole of Egypt, and in the remaining towns and villages, those would be appointed as chiefs, who in their sacred vessels had the correspondingly greatest number of krohans. You may picture yourself, my boy, what on that day began to be accomplished everywhere in that Egypt in order to have their sacred vessels the greatest number of eyes of the beings who belonged in that period of flow of time to the caste of the ruling class. On another occasion, also there in Egypt, I became a witness of a not less terrifying scene. For a clear representation about this also terrifying scene, it is first of all necessary to tell you that in this Egypt, there was formerly in every one of their large points or towns a large square on which proceeded Yes, please, honey. I love you, honey. Just one more hour. For clear representation about this also terrifying scene, there was formerly in every one of their large points or towns a large square on which proceeded all kinds of public, as they are called, religious and military ceremonies, where during these ceremonies were gathered masses of the beings from the whole of Egypt. These beings, and especially the masses of beings who belonged at the given moment to the weak castes, impeded the ceremonies, and therefore a certain pharaoh ordered ropes to be stretched around these squares so that beings who belonged to the simple castes should not disturb the progress of the ceremony. But when the ropes were stretched, it soon became evident that they would not withstand the pressure of the crowd and might often break. Then a pharaoh ordered what are called metal ropes to be made, whereupon those who are called priests were consecrated them and gave them the name of sacred cables. These sacred cables around the squares for the public ceremonies, particularly in large towns of Egypt, had at that time, thank you, honey, I love you, a colossal length, sometimes reaching to 1 centrotino. It sounds like a Reddit term. Just a centrino, a centrotino, or as the contemporary beings of your planets would say, 10 miles long. So 10-mile long metal chain, Jesus. Well, I was a witness of how a crowd of ordinary Egyptian beings began to string onto one of these sacred cables, just like an Asiatic shashlik, the beings without distinction of sex or age, who up till then had belonged to the ruling class. So basically, wow, they just skewered a bunch of people to it. And the very same night, with the help of 40 pairs of buffalo, the original skewer was dragged and thrown into the River Nile. Ooh. I saw such punishment meted out in this spirit, both during my stay personally on the surface of this planet of yours, as well as through the large Tescuano from the planet Mars. Yeah. And these contemporary favorites of yours, naive already to the 9th degree, or the nth degree, grew sincerely indignant that these contemporary Bolsheviks of theirs shot a certain Tom Brown. If we compare these actions of the former three-brained beings who were subject to this psychic state were the actions of these contemporary Bolsheviks, then they, i.e. the contemporary Bolsheviks, ought even to be given praise and thanks that in spite of the fact that the various consequences of the properties of the organ Kundebuff are infallibly completely crystallized in their common presences, as in general, in the presences of contemporary three-brained beings, they, in the very heat of that period, when they were entirely puppets under the influence of the inevitable cosmic law Suliunensis, manifested themselves with these consequences in such a way that the dead body of the person shot by them could at least be recognized as whose it was, namely Tom Brown's and nobody else's. In this place of this tale, Beelzebub deeply sighed and, gazing at one spot, became concentratedly thoughtful. Hacienda and Ahun, with a shade of surprise, but also with some sadness on their faces, began to stare expectantly at him, with, as it were, a stark fixed gaze. A little later, Hacienda, having first made quite an unintelligible grimace, and then with a voice expressing pained tenderness, turned to Beelzebub, who was still continuing to think. Grandfather, dear grandfather, manifest please aloud those informations which you have in your common presence, particularly dear to me, and which you have learned during your long existence, and which may, even Beelzebub getting a headache, Jesus Christ, which may serve me as material for the elucidation of that question which has just arisen in my essence. What's the question, Hacienda? And even for the approximate representation of which I have as yet positively no data for the logical confrontation in any of the spiritualized parts of my common presence. This question arising in my essence, the answer to which has already become necessary to the whole of my presence, consists in this: to inquire about the reasons why, namely, if these unfortunate three-brained beings who breed on the planet Earth do not have the possibility, owing to the reasons not depending on themselves, of acquiring and having, in the period of their responsible existence, divine objective reason, why, since they arose so long ago, and their species have continued to exist such a long time, could not those customs have been gradually formed by now, only thanks to the flow of time in the process of their ordinary existence, even under those abnormal conditions and those proper instinctive automatic habits, have been acquired in the presences of every being in general, thanks to which their ordinary existence, both egoistically personal as well as collectively general, might flow more or less tolerably in the sense of objective reality. Why? That is a good question, Hacienda. Why haven't we fixed ourselves through the flow of time? Having said this, the poor Hacienda began questioningly to gaze at the cause of his arising. At the questioning of his favorite grandson, Beelzebub began to relate the following. That's also a big paragraph from Hacienda. We don't usually get passages from Hacienda, so hey. Let's go, boys. Why, of course, my dear boy. In the course of long centuries of their existence, and among them, as everywhere, on planets where beings arise who spend likewise part of the time of their existence simply in the ordinary process, many customs and also what are called moral habits, at times very good and useful for their ordinary existence, were also gradually formed, and even at the present times are sometimes formed among several of their groupings. But herein lies the evil, that such a being welfare has become, as becomes fixed in the process of ordinary existence from the flow of time alone, and which improves thanks to transmission from generation to generation, also soon either entirely disappears or is changed to such a direction that these happy achievements of theirs are transformed of their own accord into unhappy ones, and increase the number of those small factors maleficent for them, the totality of which year by year dilutes more and more both their psyche as well as their very essence. So the good things that happen and appear eventually just become blocks as well. Pardon me, oof. If they were even to possess and were to use at least those trifles worthy of three-brained beings, when this would already be to the good for them, or as they themselves would say, would in any case be better than nothing. Of course, if at least any of these good customs fixed by them in the process of their existence and already automized moral habits, and have survived and been transformed by inheritance into the mode of existence of their subsequent generations, then thanks at least to this in the subjective sense, desolate existence would have seemed to be, to an outside impartial observer, at least a little reconcilable. We sow the seeds of our own undoing and our own triumphs, says Outtuition exactly. Oh my god, I'm dying right now. The causes of the complete destruction, change, of even this being welfare of their intolerable existence, achieved by time, both of good customs as well as moral urges. I might like call this in like 15. I know it's only going to, I know I said 4 and it might be only like 3.5, but I'm like tripping balls right now. Jesus. Also engendered by these abnormal conditions for the ordinary being existence around them established by themselves. As a concentrated result flowing from these abnormal conditions around them and which became the basic cause for this evil of theirs, there is a special property which arose not long ago in their psyche, which they themselves called suggestibility. It's what I have. People suggest things and I'm like, Sally, I trust you. And then I do them and I'm like, yeah, I should just trust myself. Thanks to this strange property, which had only recently become fixed in their psyche, all the functionings in their common presences began gradually to change, and as a result, each of them, particularly the beings who arose and become responsible during the last centuries of theirs, already began to represent in themselves such a peculiar cosmic formation as has in itself the possibility of acting exclusively only if it were to find itself constantly under the influence of another formation similar to itself. Oh my god, I'm dying. And indeed, my boy, at the present time, what has this got to do with Russia? What has this got to do? We were talking about alcoholism. How did we get to this? These three-brained beings who please you must already as separate persons, as well as entire large and small groupings, infallibly influence or find themselves under the influence of others. For your better representation and all-round understanding, in what ways customs and automatic habits useful for their ordinary existence acquired by them during centuries also disappear without a trace or change for the worst on account of the mentioned property of their strange psyche, we will take as an example just these same terrestrial three-brained beings with their custom whom all their beings of your planet call Russians, who represent the majority of the community named... Okay, we're back at Russia now. Ooh. Let's just... yeah. Let me just read what he says about Russians here. Let me find a good break before I end. In consequence of the fact that my ass is also hurting right now, I've been sitting on this chair. How do streamers freaking do it? My brain is fuzzy and my ass is gone. In consequence of the fact that the existence of beings which had been put as a basis of the formation of this large contemporary community there and of their subsequent generations, proceeded in the course of many centuries in the neighborhood of beings who belonged to those Asiatic communities who, thanks to various events, existed so relatively long a period, in consequence of which, in the process of their ordinary existence, as this in general happens from a long existence, very many good customs and moral habits were gradually formed by themselves and became fixed in the process of ordinary existence. These Russians, after meeting with the beings of these for terrestrial beings, ancient communities, and even at times having friendly relationships with them, gradually adopted and began to use in the process of their ordinary existence many of the useful customs and moral habits. You didn't even talk about it. You got this. Make it to France and then call it, okay. Relatable. Let's get to France, guys. And so, my boy, thanks to the mentioned strange property of the three-brained beings and this planet of yours, which property, as I have already told you, arose gradually and became soon after the Tikliamishian civilization, fixed in their general psyche, the intensity of the fixing proceeded chiefly in consequence of all the more deteriorating conditions around them, of ordinary being existence established by themselves, and which special psychic property already from the very beginning became obligatorily inherent in the common presences of beings composing this later largest community there. Then, on account of all this, They all, in former centuries, found themselves under the influence of beings of one or other of the Asiatic communities, and all the, as it is called, external mode and psychic associative form of their ordinary existence proceeded also under their influence. And so again, in consequence of the fact that in the common presences of the three-brained beings of this planet of yours who dwell on that part of the continent Asia, which was called until now is called Russia, Park Dolg duty also finally ceased to be actualized, on account of which this, for them, most maleficent property of their psyche, namely suggestibility, began gradually to increase, and in consequence of the fact that they, thanks to the changed circumstances, which flowed from always the same terrifying processes of periodic reciprocal destruction, existing only on that ill-starred planet, were deprived of the former influence and were compelled, not having the possibility of independent existence, to fall under new influences. They this time fell under the influence of beings of European countries, chiefly of the community which exists there under the name France. Hey guys. Oh my god, I feel like he could have just said Russians and avoided the last two paragraphs. Bruh. I am dead. Like, RIP in the chats. Oh, like, if he had something interesting and he's talking about higher being bodies, I could lock in. But Jesus Christ, that was like... that was a blender. He just put me through there, man. My brain is mush. So yeah, France mentioned, thank you, Tyler. I think we're gonna call it there. Thank you everyone who joined us, listened all along in that journey there. We'll pick up next week. We'll finish off this chapter next week. Jesus Christ. R.I.P. Oof. Hence the final boss of Europe. Says our tuition. Yeah, exactly. France and Germany coming up. Oof. So thank you all. Thank you for staying. If you want to help out with these streams, you can become a member or you can donate to the coffee, do some monthly subscriptions. Oh my god. I'm going to have a lie down after this. You guys do need some too after all the shots you must have taken. Okay, I'll be seeing y'all. Oh, F's in the chat. Good night, everybody. See ya.